Peter was looking forward to starting his job. He hated school and had left when he turned 16 last week. The fact that he got a job straight away had pleased him and had stopped his mother from complaining at how stupid he had been to leave school with no qualifications. He had dressed himself in his suit. He only had one. His mother didn't earn much, so he was used to not having many clothes. At least she realized that he would be able to contribute to the housekeeping now, instead of just taking money from her. Peter started out early to work. He had decided that he could walk, to save on the bus fare. He thought that he could buy a bike or a moped when he started earning some money. He arrived early at the office block where he was to work. He introduced himself to the receptionist, who checked her notes, and told him to sit and wait in the reception area until Miss Smith arrived, as she wasn't expecting him. Peter sat and waited. He noticed that there seemed to be more women than men coming to work. Eventually, a smartly dressed middle-aged woman came in, and the receptionist asked her to the desk. Peter couldn't hear what was said, but the woman looked at him, and then walked over to where he was sitting. She introduced herself. Peter handed her the letter he had received. She looked at it, then told him to go with her. It turned out that she was from Human Resources. Peter had no idea what that meant, but went with her anyway. He sat in the office whilst Miss Smith passed him a number of forms to sign. She seemed to be quite pleasant, and informed him that he would be placed with someone to teach him what to do. Then they left her office and she showed him round what seemed like a rabbit warren, and he lost track of where he was going very quickly until they came to a large open office, where there were about 10 women on the telephone, with computers in front of them, and another woman facing them whose desk seemed to be on a higher level. This woman left her desk and came over to see them, and introduced herself as Miss Jones. She was the supervisor of the department that Peter was going to learn first, and apparently, it was something to do with sales. She said I wasn't expecting a boy, which puzzled Peter. Miss Jones welcomed him, and showed him to a desk where a middle-aged woman was sitting. "This is Mrs. Higgs, stay with her today, and she will show you how to use the computer when we get a call." Mrs. Higgs looked surprised. "I thought we were having a new girl," she said. "So did I," said Miss Jones. "But this is Peter. I think that Petra must have been a spelling mistake." Peter blushed at the thought that he had got a job where they thought he was a girl, but sat down with Mrs. Higgs. "Call me Betty," she said, smiling at him as he sat down. "I don't know how much you know about us, but in this office we mainly sell ladies' clothing and shoes. Most of it is incoming calls, but we do some cold calling as well." Peter said that he didn't know what the firm did. He had just written to a few firms and asked if they had any vacancies, because his mother was nagging him about leaving school. Peter sat with Betty for the morning and watched what she was doing and how the computer worked in conjunction with the phone calls. He was very surprised that most of the sales involved underwear and the amount of men that were making orders. At lunchtime, he met the other girls in the office. Apart from the ones who staffed the phones for that period, they all said how nice it was to have a boy in the office. They had expected a girl. It turned out that he was the only male working in the department. He discovered that he should have taken something to eat, because there wasn't a canteen available. It had burnt down, and as yet hadn't been replaced, but a girl called Susan was going out, and promised to get him a sandwich. Peter was quick to learn, and by the end of the week, he was allowed to operate a workstation on his own. He had got used to the strange things that some people were buying, although he did ask Betty if she thought that some of the men were buying the clothes for themselves, given the sizes they were ordering. She just smiled, and said it was always a possibility. Peter said that he didn't think men actually did that, although he had read Catcher in the Rye. He thought that was just fiction. What was more disconcerting was the amount of times the callers referred to him as Miss. Betty said it was probably because his voice hadn't broken, and they would be expecting to talk to a female anyway. Peter was pondering this thought. Firstly, they had expected a girl, and got his name wrong, and now he had callers thinking he was a girl as well. He decided to answer the phone as Petra and see if the caller noticed. He hadn't heard the girl's name Peta, so he didn't consider that his own name could as easily be mistaken. Peter was getting settled into the job. A few weeks later, when he was told that he could have a staff discount on any clothes he wanted to buy from the firm, he laughed and said he didn't think anything would suit him, but he might let his mother see the catalog. He repeated this when he was sat with the girls at lunchtime, and was surprised when one of the girls from the warehouse department asked him how he could sell stuff that he hadn't tried on, or at least seen. "Well, it's girls' stuff, isn't it?" he answered. "Yes, but you have been answering the phone calling yourself Petra," said Miss Jones. Apparently she monitored the phones. "Well, I have so many people thinking I'm a girl on the phone, I thought it might be easier to let them to think I am, with what they are buying," he answered. No more was said at the time, but the following day the girl from the warehouse bought some underwear up for him to look at. He was very embarrassed at having these things so close to him. He hadn't been out with a girl, and his mother didn't leave her stuff lying around. "I'll leave them with you, because I'm not on my break," she said. Peter was self-conscious about the women in the office seeing him look at them, and put them into the drawer in his desk. They were still there when Peter went into work on Monday morning. He had been a bit late, and forgotten to take his lunch with him. By this time, he was accepted as part of the team by the others. At lunchtime, he decided to go to the sandwich van down the road. Susan asked him, as he was going out, what he would drop into the cleaners for her, as it was raining, and she needed to pick up some clothes. Peter felt that he owed her a favor from when she had bought him a sandwich, and didn't ask for the money, so he agreed. Peter went to the sandwich shop first as it was furthest away. When he came out the rain had got stronger, so he ran to the cleaners to get Susan's stuff. He came out to a downpour. He was walking with his head down into the rain, without looking at anything other than the footpath directly in front of him. He didn't notice the car, belonging to a young lad, with his mates on board, coming behind him, and he was walking close to the verge past a deep puddle. The lad in the car couldn't resist it, and he drove into the puddle accelerating all the way. Peter was hit by the splash, and soaked to the skin. He got back to work, and the girls were all concerned, and kind to him about it. "At least your clothes are all right," he told Susan. "The water didn't get into the bag." "I think you need to get out of those clothes," said Betty. "I can't," said Peter. "I'd have to go home, and I've lost my key so I can't get in until my mom gets home." "You can borrow my suit and blouse then," said Susan, "and you have some underwear in your drawer as well, so that isn't a problem." "It is," said Peter. "It's all girls' stuff, and I'm a boy." "That isn't what you've been saying on the phone though, is it, Peter?" asked Miss Jones. "And anyway, no one else will see you. We can try to dry your clothes out on the radiators if you take them off." "Do I have to?" asked Peter. He hadn't quite got into the idea that all the women couldn't tell him what to do. He still thought of all the adults being like his mother, or teachers. "It would be the best idea, although you will have to buy the stuff from the factory, because we won't be able to sell it afterwards." Peter wasn't listening. He was too worried about being laughed at. Peter reluctantly admitted that it was probably the only thing he could do, and went with Miss Jones and Susan to the toilets. He was used to going to the same one as the women because there wasn't a separate one for men. He had been surprised by the different noise that women make. He entered one of the stalls, and stripped off, putting his clothes into a plastic bag. Miss Jones had found a towel, and passed it to him to dry himself off. Once he had done that, she passed him a pair of deep pink knickers, which had some padding on the back, and white lace around the legs, and told him that they were a gaff, and he would need to put his willy into the pocket at the bottom of the knickers, so that it would go between his legs. Peter didn't know why, but did as he was told. When he had them on, she told him to come out so that they could help him with the rest of the clothes. "I can't come out wearing these," he said. "I look stupid." "Well, you can't stay in there all day. You have work to do," said Miss Jones. Peter unlocked the door and came out of the stall. He felt stupid wearing the knickers, and was very embarrassed. Miss Jones gave him a hug, and told him that there wasn't a lot of difference to wearing his own pants. He wasn't convinced. "Just let us finish getting you dressed, and then you can see what you look like." She told him to put his arms out straight in front of him. He did, and she quickly slipped a bra that matched the knickers up his arms. It had lace across the top of the cups, and Susan fastened it behind him. The bra had silicone inserts, which made it look like Peter had a small pair of tits, about the same size as Susan's. "I can't wear this," he said, but found that he couldn't get his arm up his back to unfasten it. Yes, you can, and it will make your clothes fit better. Susan handed him a white blouse and buttoned it up for him, because of the buttons being on the wrong side. See, this wouldn't have been right without your bra, he was told. It would have been baggy here, she said, placing her hands on his tits. She told him to sit down on the toilet and asked Miss Jones what they were going to do about his shoes. She said she would sort that out, and went off out of the toilets. Susan opened a packet of black tights and rolled them up before putting them onto his legs, because she thought that he might ladder them. I really feel stupid like this, he told Susan. Why? Susan asked. Well, these clothes are just daft. Why on earth do they have to have lace, and be this color, and button up on the wrong side? Because we girls have to be pretty, to attract men, and the buttons go back to when women were dressed by their maids, she answered. Miss Jones wasn't very long and returned with a pair of shoes which she placed on Peter's feet. Lovely fit, she said as she pushed them on. They were black, and only seemed to cover his toes over the top. Peter knew that they were girls' shoes. His mother had something similar. Why can't I wear my own shoes? He asked. Because they are all wet, and anyway they wouldn't go with your clothes, answered Miss Jones. They told him to stand up. He was surprised. They had a 1-inch heel, which was a bit above what he was used to, but he managed to be able to walk in them. They had him step into the pale gray skirt. It was a straight skirt, and fairly tight around his legs, with 2 kick pleats front and back, with a hemline which came to just below his knees. Susan pulled it up to his waist, and fastened it behind him. He then had to step into a slip, which matched his bra, and knickers, but the lace was 2 inches long around the bottom. Susan pulled it up under his skirt, and then smoothed everything down, before getting him to put on the jacket, which matched the skirt to make a suit. They let him look at himself in a full-length mirror just outside the toilet door. He was surprised, as he saw a smartly dressed girl looking back at him. I've never worn a suit that looks as smart as this before, he said, amazed at how he looked. The jacket only came down to his waist. It was in no way anything other than female wear. Miss Jones brushed his hair, which was at that point of being long for a boy but short for a girl, so that it parted on the right instead of the left, and he looked every inch like a young girl. I don't think she needs any makeup, said Susan. Peter said, thank you, I don't want any makeup, and I am a boy. Well, makeup or not, you don't look anything like a boy, said Miss Jones. They took him back to the department, where everyone was amazed at how he looked. You know, with a bit of makeup, we could make you look 18, as a boy you don't even look like you are 16, said Millie. I'd rather not, thank you, said Peter. Why did they all want him to wear makeup? Well, it's my hen party next Saturday. All the other girls are coming, but you can't come if you look like a 16-year-old boy, because it's at a club. Peter felt a little deflated that he couldn't go to a party with the others, but he couldn't go out dressed like this, could he? We'll just have a think about it. There is a spare place if you want it. Peter and the others went back to work. He was still answering the phone as Petra. With how he was dressed, it seemed appropriate anyway. He was surprised that he felt comfortable wearing these clothes, although a little embarrassed every time that one of the girls smiled at him. The shift ended, and it was time to go home. Miss Jones told him that his clothes were still wet. Well, it's still raining, he said, so they would only get wet anyway. No, I'll take you home, she said. I've put your clothes into a bag for you. Peter wasn't too happy about this. He wanted his trousers back. He was embarrassed by wearing girls' clothes in the office. He would have to go outside, and what would his mother say? Miss Jones was having none of it. She insisted it was the only thing he could do. Reluctantly, he followed Miss Jones to her car. They ran through the rain. Peter was surprised at the noise his shoes made, and the way the rain felt on his legs. He had difficulty trying to get into the car, because the skirt restricted the movement in his legs. Miss Jones giggled, and told him to sit down, then swing his legs in. He did as he was told, and managed to get into the car. Miss Jones got into the driver's seat, and started the engine. Peter could feel the air from the heater on his legs. It was cold as the engine hadn't got warm, and didn't feel like anything that he had felt before. This was all very strange. He tried to sit low in the seat in case he was seen by anyone he knew. Miss Jones got to his house, and said she would come with him to explain to his mother what had happened. She carried his bag of clothes for him. Mrs. Beard, inquired Miss Jones, when she answered the door. Yes, can I help you, ladies, she answered. I'm Peter's supervisor, and I think I might need to explain something. Turn round, Peter, she said. Peter had turned his back to the door, while they waited for it to be answered. Peter turned around, his mother's mouth dropped in shock when she saw it was him. Come in, she said, and told them to sit down in the front room. Peter wanted to get changed, but his mother told him he could do that after she knew what was going on. He followed Miss Jones into the front room, his mother used it for guests, and sat down, and his legs were almost together because the skirt was too tight to allow them to part much. His mother turned on the fire to warm the room, while she asked. Miss Jones told his mother what had happened, and why he was dressed that way. Why didn't you let them make you up? Asked his mother. You couldn't have looked bad, and dressed like that. You look like a girl anyway. Can I get changed now? Asked Peter. His mother said no, his meal was cooked, and she asked Miss Jones if she wanted to stay for something to eat. Miss Jones replied that if she had no one at home she would be pleased to stay. She asked Peter to set the table for her, which he did, and the three of them sat down to eat their meal. Peter was feeling silly wearing the girls' clothes while he was eating his meal. He wasn't really listening to the two women who were chatting to each other. He suddenly took notice when he heard his mother mention that she wasn't used to seeing him dressed that smartly. His own suit was a bit past it, and it was an improvement of sorts. Miss Jones had laughed, and told her about the invite that Peter had been given to go to the hen party. Are you going to go? Peter's mother asked him. No, it's for girls, he answered. While I agree with the others, with a bit of makeup you could look 18. Peter would have liked to go, he liked parties, and he had never been out to a nightclub. However, having to go, as a girl, didn't really grab him. Can I get changed now? He asked his mother. No dear, she replied, you have to wash up first. Peter was getting disturbed by this. Why did his mother keep saying he couldn't get changed? He picked up the plates and cutlery from the table, and went off to wash up. At least he was able to take the jacket off. Peter returned to the front room, minus his jacket, and said he had washed up, and was going to get changed, but again his mother told him to stay and sit down. He did as he was told. Miss Jones commented on how well behaved he was. Miss Jones tells me that you pretend to be a girl on the phone, she said. She also said that they were expecting a girl when they appointed you, and you are now dressed as a girl. Oh, by the way, Susan rang Miss Jones on her mobile. She says you can keep her clothes, as they fit you, and she was only going to give them to the charity shop, but they needed cleaning before she took them. She says that she has some more, if you want them, including a nice dress to go to the hen night. Peter was flabbergasted. Why would he want to keep them, or get more? He was a boy, not a girl. No, he said, I don't want to keep them, I don't want to wear them at all. What a shame, his mother replied. I think they suit you. I think you make a lovely looking girl, and I think we should see what you look like with some makeup on. Please, Mom, please don't make me wear makeup. I'll look silly. No, you won't. Go and get a chair from the kitchen, and bring it here. Peter did as he was told, and went for the chair. Miss Jones was surprised at how much control Peter's mother seemed to exert over him, and asked if he was always like this. Yes, his mother answered, I just tell him he will have to go and live with his father if he doesn't do as he is told, and when I found out that he was working in an all-female department, I told him that he would have to do as he was told there as well. So that's why he was so easy to persuade to wear those clothes, said Miss Jones. He hates his father, he was always hitting him, and so he's very scared of me sending him there, answered his mother. Peter returned with the chair, and his mother sat him down. It didn't take her long to make his face up. She tidied up his hair, and asked Miss Jones what she thought. Excellent, said Miss Jones. I think we are looking at the real Petra now. Peter wasn't amused, and asked if he could wash it off. His mother told him that he had to look at how he looked first. Reluctantly, he allowed them to take him into the hallway, where his mother had a full-length mirror, which she used to check how she looked, before going out. He looked at his reflection, but it wasn't Peter who looked back, it was a nice-looking girl. I think you are right, he could easily pass as 18 now, said his mother. Why would I want to? Asked Peter. So you can go out with the other girls, silly, said his mother. I don't want to if I have to wear silly clothes, replied Peter, although he was impressed at how smart he looked. "Well, you can keep them on for the rest of today then, if you think they are silly," his mother replied. "There are two of us here who wear them every day." Peter recognized the change in her tone, and he knew that he wasn't going to be allowed to get changed before going to bed. He went back into the front room and sat down with the two women. Miss Jones didn't stay for long after that, and Peter heard his mother ask for Susan's phone number before she went. Peter felt a sinking feeling. He thought he could guess why. His mother made him stay dressed up for the night, and even manicured his nails for him, putting a clear varnish on them, which made them shine more than usual. "It's so lovely having a girl in the house," she said. "I'm not a girl," Peter said. "No, dear, but you look very much like one, and you don't look quite so much like your father at the moment, which is a big bonus." She gave him a big kiss, and told him that she was going to ring Susan about the clothes, so he could go on the night out. Peter was amazed at his mother's attitude, but knew that he would have to do it if his mother said so, otherwise she might send him to live at his father's house. He waited for a moment, then decided to listen to what his mother was saying. "Yes, we put some makeup on him, he looks more mature, and he makes a such lovely-looking girl. You will, that's very good of you, thank you so much, I'm sure he will be thrilled." Peter doubted very much that he would be thrilled. Just what had she got planned for him? He went back into the front room, and turned the tele on. "There," she said, "I fixed it so you can go on the night out." "I don't really want to go," he said. "Well, you're going, and that's final," she replied. Peter sat with his mother watching tele. She told him to cross his legs, while he was sitting, and the only chance he had to go out of the room was when he went to make a hot drink for them, and to go to the toilet. Eventually he was allowed to go to bed. It was earlier than usual. He asked why, and she said that he would have to remove his makeup before going to bed. He had forgotten that it was still on his face. His mother followed him to the bathroom to show him how to remove the makeup. With cleansing cream, she made him take off his skirt and blouse first. Peter stood there in his underwear. His mother thought it looked very nice, and was better quality than most of hers. "You can have it then," said Peter. "No, dear, it wouldn't fit me, and anyway I wouldn't want you to be without any nice underwear." Peter said he had plenty of underwear, but his mother told him most of it should have been thrown away, and none of it was anywhere near as nice as what he was wearing. She cleaned his face, and then let him go to bed. He managed to undo the bra by pulling down the straps, which had left marks on his skin, and twisting it around. He could see himself in the mirror and realized that the marks from the bra showed on his body. He put on his pajama jacket before taking off his tights, and realized how nice the slip felt on his legs. He took it and the knickers off, and pulled his pajama bottoms on, before climbing into bed, pleased to be wearing trousers. He could feel where the bra had been round his chest, and his legs felt a bit funny from his muscles being forced into an unusual position by the slightly higher heel. He had difficulty in getting to sleep, tossing and turning. He was troubled by the day's events. He didn't want to admit it, but he had found the skirt comfortable. He was getting fed up of his pajama trousers coming up his legs, and the crutch cutting into his groin. It wasn't the first time this had happened. Peter got out of bed, and went to the toilet. He looked at himself in the mirror. "Nah, I can't do it," he thought, but then realized that he had dripped onto his trousers. He went back to his room, and turned on the light. He took off his trousers. He was going to look for a clean pair, when he saw the slip lying on the floor. The memory of the short time that he had felt it against his legs went through his head. Could he have that feeling again, he thought. He shook his head, and decided he couldn't. It was what a girl would wear, and he wasn't a girl. Then again it was his. He had to pay for it, he reasoned, and he didn't know if he had any other pajamas clean, and if he did, he didn't know where they were. It wouldn't right up and make him uncomfortable. Peter realized that he was talking himself into putting the slip on. "No one will see me," he thought. He picked up the slip, turned the light out, and stepped into it. It felt nice against his bare legs, especially the lace. He got back into bed, smoothing it down his legs. This time he fell asleep. The next morning he was late waking up. With being awake for so long he had overslept. His mother came into the room to wake him up, and picked up the clothes from the floor to put in the wash. She noticed the pajama trousers, and that the slip was missing. "Come on, Sleepy," she said, "you'll be late for work." Peter had forgotten that he was wearing the slip. It felt comfortable. His mother guessed that this was the case, and pulled the bedclothes back. Peter suddenly realized what the situation was, and blushed. His mother told him she would need to wash his slip, and could get him some proper nighties if he would like to wear them instead of pajamas. She then left the room. Peter groaned. He couldn't blame this on anyone else. He had chosen to wear the slip. He got dressed, and went downstairs, taking the slip with him, and dropped it into the wash basket. The feel of the material was really nice. He found himself wondering if it would be clean when he got home. Shaking his head, he chided himself for having those thoughts. He wasn't very hungry, so he only had cereal for breakfast. Watching your figure, his mother said. She didn't actually mean anything, it was just off the cuff, but Peter said it was bad enough that she was making him go to the party without taking the mickey. His mother was surprised, and told him she didn't mean to upset him. She wasn't even thinking of the party. He carried on with his breakfast. I think you could do with a haircut, she said. It needs tidying up. I'll make you an appointment at my hairdresser's. What's wrong with old Joe's? Asked Peter. He's not very good. It annoys me to have to pay him for what he does to your hair. I'm sure Sylvie will do it better. I might even ask her to give you the works. What's that? Asked Peter. You'll see if I ask her, she said with a smile. Peter finished his breakfast, and put his plate and cup into the sink. His mom said, That's the first time you have done that. Your time as a girl must have taught you something. I wasn't a girl, I was just dressed in silly clothes, he answered. His mother took the chance, and told him he wouldn't have to think that on Saturday, or he wouldn't be able to carry it off. Peter glared at her. Oh, and don't forget to bring your new clothes home tonight. What new clothes? Asked Peter. The ones Susan is bringing in for you, answered his mother, and I've written out an order for you to take to work as well. She handed him a sealed envelope. What are you ordering? He asked. Don't be rude, it's women's underwear if you really must know. Actually, I'm very jealous of your new underwear. Peter put his shoes on. They're still wet, he said. Well, you could try your new ones, his mother said. Yeah, right, he answered, and scurried out of the door before she insisted. He arrived at work with his feet freezing. Betty went into mother mode, and told him to take his wet shoes off. His socks had got wet as well, so she told him to take those off. She took them and put them on the radiator. Miss Jones came around and mentioned that he wasn't dressed as smartly today as yesterday. No, my trousers are still wet, he answered, and I don't have another suit. She smiled, and said, Yes, you do. It was the dry one I was referring to anyway. And why don't you have anything on your feet? Peter asked where he had to take his mother's order, trying to change the subject. I'll take it for you, answered Miss Jones, but you still haven't answered. I don't have any others, he answered. You have the ones we gave you yesterday. They are girls' shoes, I can't wear those. Susan appeared with a large hold all. Here you are, Peter, it's the old clothes your mother wanted for you. There are no shoes or underwear, but there is a cracking little black dress for you to wear on Saturday. I've only worn it once, but I fell out with my friend that night, and I was going to dump it, because it reminds me of her. Peter blushed with embarrassment, as the women would think he had asked Susan for the clothes. Let's see it then, said Miss Jones. Susan rummaged in the bag, and pulled out the dress, and held it against Peter. He couldn't see it properly, but his eyes widened when he saw where the hemline was. It must have been 8 inches above the knee, and seemed to stick out from the rest of the dress. It looked as if there was another layer under the skirt as well. He didn't take anything else in. He couldn't imagine wearing it in his worst nightmare. Okay, girls, back to work, said Miss Jones. Peter started to work, but he felt a lump in his throat. He was worrying about Saturday. Everyone seemed to want him to be a girl, and he didn't know why. They didn't seem to be doing it in a cruel manner, but they were enjoying it. When they broke for lunch, Miss Jones reappeared. She had a box in her hand. Here you are, Peter, something for your feet. She handed him a pair of natural sheer knee-high stockings. They'll keep you warm, she said. Peter sighed. He needed to leave this job before they turned him into a girl. Mind you, the clothes did feel nice against his skin. He rolled up his trouser legs. You'll have to get that fluff taken off your legs by Saturday, said Miss Jones. Peter blushed. He hadn't thought about the few blonde hairs on his legs. He rolled up the stockings and pulled them up to his knees, then rolled the trousers down over them. He couldn't resist rubbing one of his feet on top of the other. Miss Jones noticed, and commented on how nice it felt, adding that they were probably nicer to wear than his usual socks. Peter had to agree, it did feel nice, a lot warmer as well. Miss Jones commented. Yes, Peter replied. Miss Jones handed him the box. He opened it to find a pair of silver sandals, with a 2-inch stiletto heel. He lifted one out, marveling at how light they felt. They had 5 shoelace-sized straps at the front, which met in an intricate pattern at the center, and the heel was sling back with a strap that fastened at the outside edge that came on the top of his foot. Even the sole was silver. They glistened in the light. Peter hadn't seen anything like them before. Well, put them on then. He found that he wanted to. They were the nicest shoes he had ever seen, and slipped his feet into the shoes. He fumbled with the fastenings, because he had never needed to buckle up anything that small a size before, but eventually found the holes, and they were in position. He stood up and tried to walk in them, but was a bit unsteady. Take smaller steps, and place your foot down flat, he was told. He tried it, and found that it was better. I can't afford these, he said sadly. He really liked the way his feet felt in the nylon stockings on the slippy inside of the shoes. Don't worry, they were display items for a shoe we don't supply anymore, just like your other ones. We have a few more as well. Usually we throw them away, or advertise them as available for the girls, so we don't charge for them. Oh yes, there is a little handbag that goes with them as well. She handed him a small silver bag with a long thin strap, which matched the straps on the back of the shoes. I thought if you had a bag with a long strap, you wouldn't forget to pick it up. What do I need a bag for? Peter asked. To put your things in, like money and makeup. There aren't any pockets in most skirts and dresses, she answered. Right, it's time to go back to work, girls. Peter expected to be included with the girls when this sort of thing was said. He bent down to take his shoes off. Keep them on, said Miss Jones. It'll help you get used to them, and you shouldn't really be walking around with bare feet. Peter did as he was told, and remembered to take smaller steps, and place his foot flatter than he was used to. Again his shoes made a lot of noise. Why did women's shoes have to be so loud? He sat at his desk, and while he was working he couldn't stop himself from rubbing his feet together. They felt like nothing he had felt before. It really was quite nice, and the shoes were so light as well. He realized he actually liked the way girls' shoes and clothes felt. His own stuff didn't feel anything like these, but he couldn't go out in them surely. He was a boy, not a girl. Someone might realize and laugh at him. He was in a quandary. He decided that he would like to try some of the clothes on, but he didn't want to appear to be keen to do it. He had his musing disturbed by the phone, and went into gear answering the phone, until the end of the day. Petra took over his life during this time, and he forgot about the shoes and stockings. They felt like they should be there, and the occasional rub together felt so good. Susan appeared. She said she would take him home, so that he didn't have to carry the bag. He thanked her for the lift. He'd quite forgotten about the bag of clothes. He stood up, and took a step. The sound reminded him his shoes needed to be changed. He looked for his shoes and socks. They were dry. He looked at them. Susan noticed he looked sad. She gently took them off him, and placed them into her bag. You can practice, she said. Peter was still unsure. He knew he shouldn't like wearing these shoes, but they were nice, and his feet felt good. Besides, Susan had told him he had to, hadn't she? They were on their way to the car when Susan's phone rang. Oh, hello, Mrs. Beard. Yes, he's with me at the moment. I was going to give him a lift home because I've got a bag of clothes that need delivering. That's okay, I'll drop him off there, and then bring you the bag on my way. Bye. Peter wondered why he was being dropped off. Why wasn't he going home? He was almost home when Susan pulled up outside Sylvie's hairdresser's. She told him to get out. I can't, he said. Not in these shoes. Don't be silly, Peter. Sylvie has only stayed behind to do your hair. There is no one else there. She'll understand. Trust me. Susan smiled her best disarming smile at him. He caved in and got out. There was a closed sign on the door. Sylvie was sitting by the window. She was expecting him. He clicked his way to the shop, and she opened the door for him. Peter, she said, your mother asked me if I could improve your hairstyle. Come in. Peter went through the door. He hadn't smelled anything like the chemical pong that hit him as he went in. He turned to see Susan drive off. Oh, well, he was better inside than out wearing his sandals. What lovely shoes, you are a lucky girl, said Sylvie. I'm a boy, Peter answered. Of course you are, answered Sylvie, without much conviction. They are still lovely shoes though. Where did you get them? Peter told her. Just my luck, out of stock, she sighed. She led him to the wash basin, and laid him down so that the back of his head was over the basin. His neck went through a dip in front of the basin. This was new. He hadn't had his hair washed like this before. Oh dear, I've got my work cut out here, she said. Peter found himself relaxing. Sylvie was an old hand at talking to customers. She sat him up, and looked at his hair. She said, I can't do what your mother asked, but I can do something similar. What's that? Asked Peter. A surprise, was the only answer he got. She turned his seat round so that he couldn't see the mirror. He heard the scissors snipping around his head, and was aware when she cutting above his eyes. Sylvie put something that smelled nasty onto his head, and then started putting curlers into his hair. No, not curls please, he whined. No, not curls. This is going to give your hair more body when I'm finished. He found himself sitting under the hairdryer. Sylvie gave him a women's magazine to read. He flipped through it, but found his attention grabbed by a story of a woman who found her husband wearing her clothes. So he wasn't the only one. The difference was she was annoyed. All of the women who had seen him were pleased. He looked at the picture of the man wearing a dress on the opposite page, and decided that he made a better-looking girl than the man did a woman. Perhaps that was why she was angry. Sylvie reappeared. She had something in her hand. This won't hurt much, she said, and placed it onto one of Peter's earlobes. Ow, he said, as he felt a sharp jab. Baby, she said, real girls don't make such a fuss. What fuss? Thought Peter, and said ow again, as the same thing happened to his other ear. What did you just do? Asked Peter. Your mother asked me for the works, so I've pierced your ears. You'll need something to clean them, which I'll give you later, and leave them in place for 2 weeks to be on the safe side. Oh yes, you need to rotate them a couple of times each day as well. Peter's mouth dropped open. Why had his mother asked her to do that to him? Sylvie told him to put his fingertips into a little pot either side of the chair. He didn't know why, but placed them in without thinking. He was still wondering about his ears. Eventually she took him from under the dryer, and removed the hair net and curlers, then started to brush his hair out. Then she got a nail file out and did his nails. She started to buff them, which made them look shiny, and removed the ridges. His mother came to the door, and Sylvie let her in. I've just got a couple of her nails to do, and she'll be finished, said Sylvie. Said Peter. Sorry, said Sylvie, I don't get to do many boys. Wow, that's wonderful. You've done a great job, and those earrings really look nice as well. They're all finished, now you can look at yourself. She spun him round, to look in the mirror. Peter gasped in disbelief. He had a fringe that turned under across his brow. His hair was center-parted, and was in what he later learned was called a short bob. His hair curled under all the way round, and came down to just below his eyes, creating a nice frame. His ears both had circular earrings, with a little pink shiny stone hanging down, which moved when his head moved, and glittered in the light. His nails looked a nice shape, and shone with the buffing they had received. I look like a girl, he said, bursting into tears. You look lovely, said his mother, and thanked Sylvie for the job she had done. Sylvie apologized for not quite sticking to what she had been asked, but his mother said it was probably better anyway. Come on, Peter, she said. Sylvie wants to go home. Peter got up, still crying, and walked towards the door. He wasn't thinking about how to walk, but it seemed to come naturally after the advice he had been given. They walked home in silence. The noise from their shoes seemed deafening to Peter. He was scared witless that he would be seen, and was relieved when he got home. His mother opened the door, and he went inside. Go and get changed. I've put some clothes out ready for you on your bed. Peter went upstairs, and into his room. He turned on the light. On his bed was his bra and knickers, a pair of tights, a pink t-shirt with shorter, narrower sleeves than his others, and a denim mini-skirt. He went to the wardrobe, but it only contained girls' clothes. The dressing table was the same, only girls' underwear was available. Someone had dropped off his mother's order, and the top had some makeup and perfume on it. Mom, he yelled. She came up the stairs. He was sat on the edge of his bed crying again. Where are my clothes? He asked. They are all here in your room, she answered. No, they aren't. They are all girls' clothes. They are yours, his mother answered. You need to practice before Saturday. or you will give yourself away. Now get changed and come down for your tea, and bring those boys' clothes with you." Peter burst into tears again, as he stood up and started to undress. "Good girl," said his mother, crossing her fingers in hope. Peter looked in the mirror. It was a strange sight. His feet looked like a girl's. His clothes he realized could be either, but with that haircut, his face looked like he was a girl, and the glint as the light hit the pink stones on his earrings showed he was even wearing girl's jewelry. He was upset. Whatever he did, he would still look like a girl from the neck up. It had dawned on him that the clothes wouldn't make much difference. Whatever he wore, he would still look like a girl. He was a little bothered that there wasn't a slip to wear with the skirt. He sat down and took off his shoes. His legs felt strange after the way they had been forced to be by the shoes, and he peeled off the stockings. Slowly he removed his clothes, and pulled on the knickers, tucking himself away. He put his bra on, and pulled the t-shirt over his head, being careful not to mess his hair, although he didn't realize he was doing it. The t-shirt was tight-fitting, and made his tits stand out. The neckline was wider than on his own t-shirts, the sleeves were short and tight. He sat on the bed, and carefully pulled up his tights, the black pair from yesterday, which he loved the feel of on his legs. He was confusing himself. He didn't want to enjoy it. He shouldn't be enjoying it, but he was, and that was almost as embarrassing as being seen by other people. He slipped the skirt up his legs, telling himself it was the same as wearing jeans. Not that he believed it, it seemed to be very short. Then he put his flatter black shoes on. He looked at himself in the mirror. There was no doubt the image he was looking at was a girl, wearing a very short skirt. He was a little bit cold, and looked for a jumper. The first thing he found was a white cardigan. He thought that would do, and put it on over the t-shirt, but didn't fasten it. He picked up his last boy's clothes, and took them downstairs. His mother took them off him, and threw them into the washing machine. "That's a good girl," she said. "No, I'm not," said Peter. "I'm a boy. Why do I have to be a girl? Tell me you don't like how the clothes feel, and that you don't want to go to the hen night, although Millie will be upset if you don't go," she asked him. "I want to go, but I feel silly like this. I shouldn't be wearing these clothes, and the rest of it. That's why we want you to practice, so that by Saturday it will feel right for you to wear a dress, and heels, and all that lovely underwear. Besides, I would have loved to have a daughter. Can't you let me have my fantasy until the end of the week?" She looked so sad Peter couldn't upset her and agreed to be her daughter, but she had to give him his clothes back on Sunday. "Deal," she said. "But no, Peter, it has to be Petra all the time." Yes, he said, wondering what he had let himself into. His mother hugged him and gave him a big kiss. "Thank you. I appreciate what you are doing for me," she said. They sat down and ate their meal. With going to the hairdresser's and everything, the time had passed, and it reached 8 o'clock. There was a knock on the door. It was Susan and Millie. Susan introduced Millie to Peter's mom, and they were asked to come in. Peter was sat in an armchair. His skirt was a lot shorter compared to his other one, and he was aware of the amount of leg he was showing. "Stand up, Petra, we have visitors," said his mom. Peter stood up, and nervously tried to pull the hem of his skirt down. "Wow, look at you," said Millie. "You look terrific." "I don't feel terrific," answered Peter. Now, Petra, don't ever refuse a compliment. You should just say thank you, and you should thank Susan for your clothes as well." "Sorry, Mom. That's nice of you, Millie. You look very nice as well, and thank you for the clothes, Susan." "I don't know about that," said Susan. "I'm sure that you look better in them than I did." "I doubt it," said Peter truthfully. "I suppose you are wondering why we have come," said Millie. "Well, I wasn't expecting visitors," said his mom. "We wanted to make sure that you didn't mind Peter, that is Petra, coming to the do, but it looks as if I don't need to ask." "No, I don't mind at all. That's why I'm making her live the part until Sunday. I think she will learn a lot about life, from a different point of view." Peter was gobsmacked that he would have to be a girl when he was at home, but wondered about getting his clothes for during the day. "Do you want to have a cup of tea, or something?" "Well, we were going out to the pub, but that would be nice." "Petra, be a love and put the kettle on, please." Peter was amazed his mother never asked him to put the kettle on. She always told him to. He went into the kitchen, and made a pot of tea. Then he put cups and saucers, a jug of milk, and the teapot on a tea tray, before pouring the boiling water on the tea bags. He removed the bags and went into the front room where the women were sitting. He placed the tray on the coffee table, bending over. He felt his skirt rise up behind him. He stood up quickly, red-faced. "Yes, dear, we all saw tomorrow's washing. Bend your knees, not your waist, when you wear a short skirt, otherwise everyone will get a look." He bent his knees and poured out the tea, asking who wanted sugar, and handed it out. The women were chatting. He didn't want to join in, but listened to what was being said. There was some idle chat about how well Petra had fitted in with the other girls, and was well liked, but it moved on. His mother said how much she had wanted a girl, but she had lost a baby before Petra was born, who was a girl, and then her husband had punched her when she was pregnant after Petra, and had lost another girl. Apparently, she wasn't able to get pregnant again. Peter felt very sorry for his mother, and put his arm around her. "Sorry," he said. "What for? For not being a girl." His mom started to cry. "It's not your fault, and I had learned to live with it. I suppose seeing what might have been has just upset me." She composed herself, and said, "I think we need something stronger. Would you like to go to the local pub?" she asked Millie and Susan. "Yes," they replied, "but can we use your first name? Mrs. Baird sounds so formal." "Of course you can, it's Shirley. I think you had better call me that as well, Petra." She went out to get ready, and the two women descended on Peter. "Her eyebrows need a little tidying up," said Millie. Without waiting, she produced a pair of tweezers, and swiftly removed some hairs. "Ow, that's worse than my ears," said Peter. "Then you will appreciate the difference," said Millie. Susan applied his makeup for him. "There, that's done." They let Peter look in a mirror. His eyebrows had been almost completely removed, leaving a thin line above each eye. His eyes looked larger and wider than he was used to seeing them. His eyelashes also looked darker and fuller, and his lips were a rosy red color. Even his cheeks looked redder than usual. His mother reappeared. "Wow, look at you," she said. "What an improvement." Peter didn't think so. He wondered how he was ever going to be able to go out as a boy with this haircut and eyebrows. She gave him a little black handbag so that he could take some more paint and money with him. "It hasn't got a strap, so you will have to put it on your lap when you are sitting down, and hold it in your hand when stood up." He watched as she dropped the makeup into his bag and placed a 10-pound note in as well, and then she gave it to him. "Right, put your coat on, Petra. We can walk. The pub is only a short walk." Peter wasn't sure he had a coat. His mother seemed to have hidden all his boy clothes, but he found one hanging on the hall stand. "Are you sure you don't want that coat? It looks almost new," his mother asked Susan. "No, I've had it a while. It was one of those purchases that seemed to be a good idea at the time." Peter put the coat on. It was black and buttoned on the wrong side down to the waist level, where it flared out and came to midway up his calves. He found a pair of gloves in the pocket. It was cold outside, so he put them on, only to find that they came a couple of inches above his wrists. "Even my gloves are different," he thought. "This is just so different to my stuff altogether. Feels nice though." Millie reminded him to pick his handbag up. His mother opened the door, and the women went out. Peter took a big breath and followed them. As he turned to close the door, it suddenly struck him that he was not only going to have to walk further than he had done outside, but was going somewhere he had never been to, and there would be lots of people there. He froze. Susan turned round and said, "Come on, you'll be all right, trust me." She came back and banged the door shut. A fleeting thought of the doors being slammed on porridge entered his mind. He was locked out. Susan took his hand and gently led him down the path. "Come on, you're doing fine, and no one is going to recognize you." They didn't talk much as they walked to the pub. Peter didn't want to. He had a lump in his throat, and was wondering what was going to happen next. He could feel the cold air on his legs, but it wasn't unpleasant. When he saw some young lads coming towards them, he felt scared and vulnerable. Other than a wolf whistle that sounded from behind them after the lads had passed, there was no problem. They got to the door of the pub, took one step up, and were inside the building. It was a hallway. "Toilets are through there," his mother said, and with that went through the door into the lounge bar. It was noisy, with fruit machines, the jukebox, and chatter of the people sat around on separate tables. "No smoking here," said his mother. "We don't anyway," said Millie and Susan. They found a table in the corner with a comfortable couch to sit on, so they grabbed it. Susan asked them what they wanted, and said, "Petra, could you help me with the drinks, please?" "Do you want to leave your handbag with me, dear?" his mother asked him. Yes, he replied, handing it to her. He followed Susan to the bar. Hello ladies, I don't think I've seen you in here before, what can I do you for? Asked the barman. Susan asked for the drinks, but Peter didn't recognize what she had ordered instead of the Coke he had asked for. They took the drinks to the table. Peter's mother told him to take his coat off. He did, and immediately caught the attention of some lads across the bar. He folded his coat and placed it on the couch. Knees not waist dear, you've just given them a flash. Peter blushed with embarrassment at the thought that the lads had seen his girl's underwear. He just couldn't get used to this, and sat down next to Millie. His mother passed him his handbag to place on his lap. Don't drink that too fast, it's alcoholic cola, said Millie. So did the barman notice? Nope, he thought our Petra was old enough, answered Susan. That's brilliant because he knows Peter, and me if he didn't click, no one will. Mom, said Peter, he might not have noticed, but I think those boys over there have, they keep looking at me. This started a round of giggles from the women. It's not funny, said Peter indignantly, what are they going to think of me? Susan managed to stop first, and said how sweet, that was priceless, they'll probably think that you did it deliberately, as a come on. What? Said Peter. They think you are a girl, and after your little display, they want to get into those knickers. Why would they want to wear them? He asked. The women had tears running down their faces at this. Millie managed to talk first. They don't. Did you have sex lessons at school? Yes, he replied. Well, that's what they want to do with you? He thought for a minute, and then said they can't. I don't have anything they could do that with. This is the best laugh I've had in a while, said his mother. Peter was pleased about that. His mother hadn't really laughed much since she divorced his father, but wondered why he was making them laugh. What you are looking at is pure male lust. They think that you are a very attractive woman, and fancy you. Trust me, they have no idea. Peter was uncomfortable with the idea that boys might fancy him, and said I don't want them to. Well, don't let them make eye contact with you, and don't flash your pants at them then. What's eye contact? He asked. You really do have a lot to learn, don't you? Look at me directly into my eyes, and you see how I'm looking back at you. That's eye contact, said Susan. How do girls know these things and boys don't? He asked. Because we have to be cleverer than them, she replied. He spent the night trying to avoid the glances that he knew were being made in his direction, but one of the lads came over and said that they were here overnight and wanted to know if they could buy the women a drink, and invited them to join them. You can buy us a drink if you like, but don't expect anything else, said Shirley. Nothing more than a chat, that is. I'm old enough to be your mother. I'm engaged, said Millie. I'm a lesbian, said Susan. Peter was shocked by what Susan had said. And what's your excuse? The lad asked Peter. Oh, I'm a boy, he said without thinking. The lad laughed out loud, and said that he had never had a girl blow him out like that before. That's a classic, he said. He went over to his own table, and said something. Peter saw them look over at him, and burst out laughing. See, I told you, he said, they know. They don't, they're laughing at your reply. The lad got up, and went to the bar, and came over to the table with a tray of drinks. I believe this is what you girls are drinking, he said. We thought you deserved it for making us laugh. We have had a rotten day on the most boring course in the world. Perhaps we could join you just for the company? I suppose so, but it won't be for long. We are going home after this drink, his mother answered. He beckoned the other lads over, and they squeezed round the table, introducing themselves. Finally it came to Peter. He was a little bit tipsy. He thought it might be funny to carry on with the thing about him being a boy. George, he said. Is that short for Georgina then? He was asked. No, that's George as in George. I'm just pretending to be a girl. You can call me Petra if you prefer. Ha, I don't think you could ever get away with fooling anyone that you are a boy, no matter how hard you try, Petra, he answered. Peter managed to keep out of the conversation after that. The men all seemed to be trying to outdo each other. His mother had finished her drink and indicated that they should leave. Thanking the men for the drinks, Peter stood up and went to pick his coat up, but the lad who had spoken first picked it up and said, "Allow me, Miss George," and held it so that Peter could put his arms into it. Peter slipped his arms into the coat, and the lad wrapped it round him, giving him a quick kiss on the cheek as he did it. Peter jumped. He was taken by surprise. "Sorry," he said, "I didn't mean anything. I've sat there all night wanting to ask you out. The alcohol got me all carried away." Peter forgave him and said that it was only that he hadn't expected it. He had buttoned up his coat ready to go. "Oh, let him have a proper kiss, Petra," his mother said. The lad stepped forwards. He was about 6 inches taller than Peter. He put his arms round Peter's waist, then decided to guide Peter's arms where he wanted them, around his neck. He looked directly into Peter's eyes, and Peter realized what he had been told about eye contact was true. The lad pulled one of his hands up to between Peter's shoulders and kissed him on the lips. Peter's head was pushed back, and the kiss wasn't just a peck, it was a long snog. Peter hadn't ever kissed a girl. His first real snog was with this boy. He hadn't noticed, but he had put one of his hands onto the back of the lad's head and was stroking his hair. They pulled apart a couple of inches and looked into each other's eyes. This time it was Peter who guided the lad's mouth towards his by putting pressure on his head to pull it forwards. When they parted, the others gave a big cheer. They let go of each other. Peter was feeling all funny inside. He didn't know why. "We're going this way," said his mother. "Can we walk you home?" they asked. "No," she answered. "It's only a couple of minutes, and I don't do coffee." They all said good night and went their opposite ways home, the men to their hotel and the women to Shirley's house. "You little flirt," Millie said to Peter. "There's a name for people like you, and it's prick teaser. Poor man, he's going to be awake all night thinking about you." "I didn't do anything," protested Peter. "No, of course you didn't, and it wasn't you that pulled him into that second snog, was it?" "I don't know why I did that," he said. "Well, now perhaps you believe us that no one will be able to tell who you are at my party." "No, I suppose not," he answered. They arrived at the house, and the girls were invited in. "I should go home really," said Millie. "You think I'm going to let you drive home after drinking that much? You are wrong," said Shirley. "If you say so, Mom," said Millie in mock annoyance. They went in and sat down. Peter sat on the sofa with Susan. Millie sat in an armchair. "Now who wants a last drink then?" said Shirley. "I have sherry." "Sherry or sherry?" "Do you have any sherry?" asked Susan. "Yes, okay. I'll have that then." She poured out 4 glasses, so that they had one each. "Well, girls, that was the best night out I have had in a long time, and yes, Petra, my sluttish little daughter, I'm including you in that." "What did I do?" asked Peter. "Well, let's see. You looked across at their table when you were bringing us our drinks, which grabbed their attention, and then blatantly flashed your knickers at them. You gave them an impossible reason for rejecting their advances, and then, after that peck on the cheek, you gave him the old dough I'd come on for more. Then what? Oh yes, you let him chew the face off you, with no attempt to stop it, and then made him do it again. Poor soul, he had a monster heart on when he left." "What?" gasped Peter. He didn't believe his mother would say that. "We girls notice that sort of thing, and I must be thinking of you as a girl, or I wouldn't have told you that. Trust me, he would have had to relieve himself when he got home." Peter was worried. His own little pecker had got a bit excited, and he knew something had been ejected. It was only the strength of the gaff that had stopped him creating a tent in his skirt. "Is it normal to feel like you have butterflies in your stomach after drinking?" he asked. "When did it start?" asked Millie. "After he kissed me the first time." "What, the little peck?" His mother and Susan started to take notice. Yes," he answered. "No wonder you would have carried on. If we hadn't stopped you. It's called love." "It can't be. He's a man, and I'm a boy." "Was that your first long snog?" "Yes," he answered. "Well, that's it then. You would probably feel the same if it was with a girl. It was just a new and exciting thing, and let's face it, at the moment you are behaving like a girl anyway." Peter went quiet while he tried to go through everything he had done, and sipped on his sherry. He put down his glass. He was feeling tired. He should have gone to bed, but it was too much like hard work. Without thinking, he lay down with his head on Susan's lap. Very soon he was fast asleep. His mother started to stand up. "It's okay, Shirley, don't disturb her. I'll be all right here," she said, stroking his hair gently. Shirley and Millie went off to bed. Millie was using Peter's bed. Shirley brought 2 blankets down so they wouldn't get cold, and arranged them. Peter woke up a little disorientated. He lifted up his head. It felt like it was made of lead. He dropped it down again into Susan's lap. his mother walked in. "Come on girls, time to get up or you will be late for work." He groaned. "First hangover, always the worst," said Millie, who seemed to be as bright as a button. "Right, Petra, upstairs, get that makeup off, have a wash. Millie says she has put some clothes ready for you." "Can I borrow one of your skirts?" asked Susan. "You seem to have dribbled on mine, and there is makeup on it as well." "They're yours anyway, so yes." "No, they aren't, Petra, I gave them to you. Don't worry, I'll bring it back." Peter went upstairs and stripped off. His shoes were still on his feet, and his legs felt very strange when he took them off. He cleaned up his face and had a good wash. He went into his room and put on the underwear Millie had left for him. It was a set like his pink set, only in pale blue. The tights were almost white in color, and he pulled them up his legs. Somehow he felt happy to have them on. Then he put on a cream blouse that had a shine to it, with little puff sleeves, and a small round-tipped collar, which had some embroidery around the edge. The skirt was circular, and a deep green color. He stepped into it, and fastened it behind his back, pulling up the zip after he had done the button up. Then he pulled his slip, which matched his bra and knickers, up to his waist. He stepped into his black shoes. They almost felt flat after his sandals, and went downstairs. He looked in the mirror. He was pleased with what he saw, except for his hair. He picked up a brush, and quickly brushed it into shape. He went into the kitchen. Susan was wearing a pale pink skirt that seemed to hug her legs, and ended just below her knees. "I hope she gives me that back," he thought. "That looks terrific." "Give us a twirl then," said his mother. He spun round, and his skirt spread open and circled his waist. "Thank you, you look great," she said. She turned to Millie and Susan and said, "That girl just can't keep her underwear hidden, can she?" "That's not fair. You wanted me to give you a twirl. You knew my skirt would fly out." The women laughed. "Come and have your breakfast." He walked over to the table and sat down, remembering to smooth his skirt underneath him. He only had a cup of coffee. He couldn't face the food the women were eating. "How can you eat that?" he asked. "Practice," they replied. They drove to work, dropping off Shirley on the way, and started work. There were a few gasps and raised eyebrows when the three of them arrived, but nothing was said at that time. At lunchtime they were sitting in the restroom. Betty started it off. She mentioned that her husband had asked who the new girl was when he saw her get out of the car, because he thought she was a little cracker. "Yes, but he has no taste, has he?" "Well, he married me, didn't he?" "Case proven then. Ha ha." "Who is she?" asked Peter, wanting to join in. "You, of course," said Betty. "Me," said Peter. "I'm not new." "Well, you're not a new boy, but you are a very new girl," she said. "You didn't tell him, did you?" asked Peter, mortified at the thought of anyone else knowing. "Yes," she said, pausing for effect. "I told him you were a Petra, a hard-working and very pleasant young girl, and if he didn't put his tongue away I would cut something he holds dear off while he is asleep. He has nightmares about that since that Wayne Bobbitt case." "Talking of castration, our sweet little Petra knows just how to do that," said Millie, and recounted the story of the night out in the pub. "Poor man," she said, "didn't know what had hit him." "You little minx," said Betty. "Good on you, let the buggers squirm, I say." Everyone's attention was on Peter though, wanting to know how she felt. Peter was embarrassed and didn't want to talk about it, but they eventually got it out of him. "She's in love," was the general consensus. "Leave her alone, sweet 16, and never been kissed," was another comment. "She certainly made up for it though. I thought she was going to suck his face off before we stopped her." The bell went and they returned to work. The week passed, and Peter was gradually tugged into his female persona. He even gave the wrong name when he went for his pay, when he said Petra instead of Peter. The cashier smiled when she handed him his pay packet. She knew about the mix-up with his name when he first started. Millie was taking him and Susan to his house. Shirley had insisted that they should go there to change and return to after the night out, because it was much closer than their houses. Then she said that as she wasn't invited to the hen party, she wanted to have a mini one on Friday for the four of them. Millie and Susan both liked her, and Millie wanted her to meet her fiancé as well. Peter didn't know that part of it. They arrived at his house. His mother was not at home, so they decided to get changed ready to go out. Peter was wearing a sleeveless pale green dress that had a hem 4 inches above his knee and clung to his legs. He wasn't risking showing his knickers again. He also had a pair of green court shoes with a 3-inch heel. He had got used to walking in heels, and a matching handbag. Miss Jones seemed determined to make sure he had plenty of stuff. Peter made them a pot of tea. They were watching the tele, while they waited for Shirley to come home. Shirley arrived in a fluster. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I got caught up in something at work, and couldn't get away. I had to buy fish and chips. Will that do?" "Of course," they said. "That's fine. Sit down." Petra's made a pot of tea. "I think it's still warm. We are ready to go so we won't get in your way." She went to the kitchen, and found some clean plates. "They don't match, unfortunately," she said apologetically. "It doesn't matter," she was reassured. She shot out again to get salt vinegar and tomato sauce. Susan had opened the packets, and was sharing out the chips. "Thank you," she said. They sat down and ate. Shirley was quiet. She wanted to finish so that she could get changed. Millie was telling them about her friend from school, Alex, who would be the second bridesmaid, Susan being the first. Apparently, she was almost the same size as Susan, who was similar in stature to Millie anyway. "Petra could be first stand-in then," said Susan. "She's around the same size." Peter wondered what it would be like to be a bridesmaid. He didn't like weddings as a rule, because he had to wear a suit and a tie, and they seemed to revolve around women, with the men playing a bit part. He just smiled. "No objections then?" asked Susan. "That's it then. Petra can officially be the first stand-in," said Millie. He had finished his meal, and helped by taking the plates out to the kitchen. Somehow it didn't feel so bad while he was Petra. Peter would have objected to the idea of doing that when asked to. Shirley came downstairs. "Give us a twirl," said Peter, when he saw she was wearing a skirt, which would stick out if she did. "You're not seeing my underwear. I leave that sort of thing to little hussies like you, Petra dear," she said. Peter giggled at her. Millie's phone rang. "The taxi's on the way," she said. Peter wondered why they needed a taxi. They were only going to the local pub. He was even more puzzled when they went out to walk to the pub. He was wearing his favorite coat and gloves again. It was his only coat, but he liked it better than his male ones, so it was his favorite coat. He was getting so used to wearing skirts that the original feelings had gone, and were replaced with those feelings of comfort that come when you are used to it. Even the noise his shoes made now sounded right when he walked. He missed it if he walked without the sound. They arrived at the pub. Susan ordered the first round. Peter had an Alco Pop again. They sat down, and Peter decided to ask what the taxi was in aid of. "This," said Millie. As two men walked through the door, they walked over to the table, and one of them bent over to kiss Millie. "This," said Millie, "is my husband-to-be, Mike. This," said Mike, "is my best friend, and best man, Trevor." Millie introduced Susan, who was going to be her senior bridesmaid. "That makes me sound ancient," groaned Susan. Shirley, who was Petra's mother, and Petra, who had agreed to be first reserve in case they needed one for the wedding. "What a shame," said Mike. "Can't you squeeze another one in?" He looked at Peter, and said, "We have a practice at the church on Monday. We weren't able to get one before that. Are you going to stand in for Alex? She's going to ski down an Alp somewhere until next Friday." "I'd love to," said Peter, much to the women's amazement. The men went to the bar. "I didn't expect that," said Millie, looking at Peter. "Neither did I. I just thought I couldn't say no to him." "Yes, he has that effect. I think he could talk a donkey into buying its own hind leg. It's what he does, and he is good at it." The men returned and sat down. Millie was obviously happy to have her fiancé there, but there was that sort of awkwardness that comes with not knowing each other and mixed company. Trevor decided to try to break the ice. He asked Petra how she felt being number 3 on the list. "I don't mind," answered Peter. "I was only elected to it tonight, because I am the right size to fit the dress. Anyway, I would be more disappointed for whoever couldn't do it, than happy to step in." "What a lovely attitude," he said. "Can I include you in the best man's right to dance with the bridesmaids after the wedding?" "That reminds me," said Millie. "I forgot to give you these." She handed Shirley 2 invitations. "They are only for the late due, and not the formal part, I'm afraid." "Thank you," said Shirley. "We would love to come, of course we will." "I think I need the toilet," said Peter to Susan. The women got up, and the 4 of them went to the toilets. Peter checked that there was no one else in them, and asked his mother why she had said yes to the do. "You promised me that I could be a boy again on Sunday." "You can't," said Shirley. if you remember you volunteered to stand in for Alex on Monday, so you need to stay as a girl until then anyway, otherwise you might get out of the habits that you have developed to make yourself pass as a young lady. Anyway, what is another week? You know that you are enjoying yourself wearing skirts. You haven't even looked at the pair of trousers in the bag of stuff Sue gave you. Peter was going to reply that he didn't know they were there. He thought that his mother had emptied everything out of it when the door opened and two other women walked in. Millie went out through the door followed by Susan, and Shirley followed them. Peter followed on. He wondered to himself why he hadn't searched everywhere to find his clothes. She can't have hidden them that well in the time she had to remove them. He had to admit to himself that he liked the feeling of his clothes, something he never had with his boys' clothes. Besides, he got to go to the pub and have real drinks, something he wouldn't be able to do normally. Another week would be all right. He started to pay attention to the conversation. Trevor kept trying to turn the conversation round, finding out more about Petra, like whether she had a boyfriend, and what music she liked, etc. Millie watched as Susan and Shirley managed to change the conversation every time Trevor thought he was getting somewhere. They had another toilet break. "Can't take the hint, can he?" said Millie. "He's up against the SS here," said Susan. "SS?" asked Peter. "Sue and Cheryl chat up Destroyers Supreme," Susan answered. "I don't think you could have fought him off on your own, Petra." "No," said Shirley. "He's too dim to take the hint, I think." "No, he's clever, just lacks the social skills. I hope he's not trying to get Mike to do it for him. He can be a handful if he gets going, as you might have noticed, Petra," said Millie. He certainly is," said Peter. "He's talked me into that practice already." They returned to the table. Peter noticed that there was still half an hour to go before closing. "So," said Mike, "where's your boyfriend tonight, Petra?" "Swimming club," said Peter. "He's very sporty. He says the swimming helps his stamina for playing rugby. He says he is a lock forward or something like that." "What, in the Colts?" asked Mike. "No, I think he said it was the firsts. Anyway, he will be happy that he can stay with the lads tomorrow and next week without having to make it up to me afterwards." He smiled at Mike. "Right," said Mike, and changed the subject. The men decided that they needed the toilet and got up to go together. "Must be catching these group toilet visits," said Shirley. "Or are you exploring your feminine side?" They looked positively bewildered. Millie was in fits of giggles. "Well, I've never seen those two collapse like that before. Where on earth did that come from, Petra?" "A girl I asked out told me that about a sixth former. I was terrified of being beaten up for a month after that." Shirley just said, "After my ex-husband, I just don't like pushy men. Sorry, Millie, they aren't my type." "Mike's all right. I just need to get him away from Trevor. He seems to bring out the worst in him," answered Millie. The men returned. Peter was able to relax, as they seemed to have decided it was probably better that they left him alone. Susan and Millie started to talk about the next night's hen party, so Mike and Trevor chatted between themselves, pretending not to notice that the girls were going to a women-only night. The three who were going sorted out where they would be picked up. Sue said she would go to Shirley's house, so the taxi wouldn't cost as much, which was agreed. Closing time came and the men went home. He walked home with his mother. He slipped his arm through hers as they walked along. "I hope you're not enjoying this too much," his mother said. "Why? Don't you think I should be happy then?" "Of course I do. It's just that you seem to be happier this week than you have been for ages, and now you've signed up for another week." "Well, I do get to have a real drink and stay out late at the pub," he said. "Yes, and make sure you don't drink too much tomorrow night. I suspect that Millie and Susan will probably be a little past taking care of you," she said as they arrived home. "That's probably right," said Millie. "Mind you, Betty will probably consider herself the mother figure. She usually does." Peter ran up to the bathroom to relieve himself and decided to clean his makeup off. Then he got changed ready for bed, before going downstairs where his mother had made a cup of hot chocolate for them. He sat down with the other three in the front room. "I think he's getting into this idea of being a girl a little bit too much," his mother was saying. "I'm beginning to get worried about it. I'm sure he's got more girls' clothes and stuff than boys now, and that has only been for a week." "I don't think so," said Sue. "He's just making the most of exploring his feminine side." "That's as maybe, but I don't think he has explored his masculine one yet," his mother answered. Peter walked into the room, and the subject changed. "Are you warm enough in that nightie?" his mother asked. She realized that even without makeup and padding, he still looked like a girl, and it wasn't due to his nightie either. "Yes," he answered. He sipped on his chocolate, and asked Millie if she wanted to use his bed again. He could stay downstairs. "That's nice of you, Petra," said Millie. "I'm really tired, if you don't mind, Shirley." "No, it's fine. I was going to suggest that you shared the double bed with Sue in the spare room. I've made it up now, but if you're tired I suppose you won't want to be woken up later," she replied. "Thanks," said Millie, and went upstairs to go to bed. Shirley said she was going to go as well, so she went off to bed, leaving Sue and Peter. They sat quietly finishing their chocolate. "Do you like me?" asked Peter. "Of course I do. I think you are really good fun to be with. I don't like many males, I never have, but I like you a lot. I think you are smashing. You have been a real good sport, and I can't wait to be with you tomorrow," she answered. "Oh," he said, "I've never had a girlfriend. I was just going to, well, you know." Sue leaned over and kissed him. "I'm a bit too old for you. I'm nearly 20, she said, trying to let him down lightly. "And I'm not really looking for a boyfriend. I'll tell you what though. I'd like to be a girlfriend with a space." Peter looked puzzled. "That's a friend who is a girl, but without the relationship worries that go with girlfriend without the space." She wrote the 2 ways of saying it down so he could see what she meant. "Trust me," she said, "we'll stay friends a lot longer that way." Peter looked very sad. "Come on," she said, "we can share the double bed, just like a couple of girls." She stood up and put her hands out. Peter took them, and she pulled him to his feet. They went up the stairs and got into bed together. They were soon asleep. The next morning the door opened, and Shirley walked in. She was surprised to see Peter with Susan. She had thought he was sleeping downstairs. "I brought you a cup of tea. It looks like I should have bought 2, she said curtly. Susan sat up. "You're okay, Shirley. She's still as virginal as the day you had her. I'll fetch another cup then." She went to get another cup. She returned to see Susan sat on the side of the bed, while Peter was propped up on the pillows looking the worse for wear. "Hangover," said Susan. "I've given her a couple of paracetamol, but the tea will help." Shirley gave Peter his tea. "What's virginal, and why am I still it?" asked Peter. "He didn't get the lessons at school. He forgot the letter," said Shirley, looking uncomfortable. Peter had, but he didn't tell his mother that. He just didn't really understand everything that it meant. "It's okay. I'll tell him if you like. It might be easier for me." Shirley grimaced, but accepted the suggestion. She left the room. Virginal, or being a virgin, means that you haven't had a sexual relationship. You can use it to describe anything that's used, like your willy. "I do use it. I'm not a virgin. I go to the toilet," he answered. "You really are sweet," she said. "It can be used for other things as well." He went to answer, but she said, "Just wait, and it will all become clear. You have a willy, I don't, and that's why we make you hide it when you're wearing a skirt, yes?" He nodded agreement. "Sometimes it gets hard and stands up." He nodded again. "Well, to have a sexual relationship, which can be fun, or to make babies, you have to insert your willy into the girl's vagina, or fanny, to use the crude term, although there are other words as well. That's a hole between her legs." "I've got a fanny then," said Peter. "No, that's your bum hole. This is a different one." "So it's where you pee from then?" "No, that's another thing." "Good grief, with all those holes, how do you know where to go?" Susan sat by him on the bed, and took his hand. "I'll show you," she said. She pulled up her nightie up. Peter looked at the hair she had displayed. "There is nothing there," he said. He hadn't seen a girl like this. She opened her legs. "Just feel here," she said. She guided his hand to her urethra, and placed one of his fingers on it. "That's where we pee from." She moved it to her anus, and said, "That's the same as your bum hole." And then she guided his finger to her vagina, "And that's where you willy goes, to make babies." He pulled his hand away, and brushed her clitoris. "Ooh," she said. "What was that?" he asked. "Well, it's a bit like the end of your willy, only much shorter, and we don't pee through it." She took his hand away, and pulled her nightie down. "I'll tell you more another time. Come on, we need to get dressed and have something to eat." Peter was feeling very strange after that interlude. They went downstairs. Peter played with his breakfast. He wasn't really very hungry, his stomach was churning, both with the hangover and with the excitement of having touched Susan down below. He had a glass of water and a cup of strong coffee, and started to feel a bit better. His mother said she had to go and do a bit of shopping and asked if anyone wanted to go with her. "I'll drive us there," said Millie, "but I don't think these two are up to it." "What shopping? I'd crawl there if I had to. I love shopping," said Susan. "No, it's only for food, I'm afraid. I wasn't expecting guests," said Shirley. "Ha, it's Saturday, that's shopping day, not a food collecting day." Susan seemed to have brightened up considerably, and continued by telling Peter that they had to get ready quickly so they could hit the shops. Peter groaned. He wasn't up to it, but Susan had nothing of it, because it is the best hangover cure there is. They went upstairs, and Millie picked out a nice little dress for him to wear, and got dressed herself. They went down ready to go out. Peter was wearing his black shoes with the 1-inch heel. Susan had told him he would be better off wearing them as he would have higher ones later. They got in the back seat. Shirley got in the front, with Millie. Instead of going into the local shopping center, they drove to the city. Peter found that it was more fun to shop as a girl than a boy, even for food shopping. His mother tried to buy some boys' clothes for him, but gave up after the third time. He told her that Peter wouldn't like what she wanted to buy. Millie went into a jeweler's, and came out of it with a silver locket. "Let's go to a cafe for a drink, and something to eat," said Shirley. "I'm not having you three going out without something in your stomachs." They went into the burger bar, and got a cheeseburger each, with a Diet Cola, and sat down. Peter was still struggling with his food, and only ate half of it. "Are you all right, dear?" Shirley asked him. "Yes, my stomach just feels a bit funny," he replied. Millie was sat opposite to him, and had been cutting something out. She then pushed it into the locket, and started to do the same thing again. "What are you doing?" asked Peter. She smiled at him, and handed him the locket. "It's traditional to buy your bridesmaids a present, so as you are first reserve, I have got you one as well. There you are." "Thank you," said Peter. He looked at the heart-shaped locket on its fine silver chain. "Open it," said Millie. Peter found the little clip that held it shut and opened the locket. There were 2 pictures inside. Peter smiled, and showed it to Shirley. "That's lovely," said Shirley, and handed it to Susan. "How sweet," she said. Peter let a big tear run down his face. "Thank you," he said. "That's really nice of you." He took another look at the pictures. One was of him as a boy, the other was him as a girl. Susan took it out of his hand, closed it, and put it around his neck. "I got the pictures from the security man at work," she explained. "What a lovely thought," said Shirley. Peter was really pleased, and gave Millie a big kiss on the cheek. "Getting into this kissing thing, isn't she?" said Susan. They spent the rest of the day trying on clothes and shoes, and had a lot of fun in the hat department, before going home to get ready for the night. Peter decided that he should get rid of the fine hairs off his legs, and under his armpits, although he very little, and used some foul-smelling cream to do it. It burned a little but wasn't too bad, and his legs looked lovely and smooth, after he had showered and rubbed in the skin cream. "Come on, you're worse than a girl," his mother shouted through the door. "Can't be. I am one," answered Peter. He came out wrapped up in a towel dressing gown. Susan dived through the door. "Cow," said Millie. "I was here first." Peter went into his room. He knew what he was going to wear, and had put the clothes out ready, and he pulled his knickers on, hiding his willy away. Millie came in and asked if he needed any help. "Yes," he answered. "I'm not sure how this goes on. It's a basque, and it works the same as a bra for your tits, but it will pull your waist in a bit as well." She wrapped it round him, and fastened up the hooks and eyes at the back. Then inserted the pads out of his bra into the cups. "There," she said. "Will you be all right now?" "I think so," he said. "Good, because I think she has come out of the bathroom." Susan stuck her head round the door, and said, "Moo." "Yes, you are," said Millie, laughing, and went to clean up. Susan came in with her clothes to get dressed with Peter. "Are you all right in that, Petra?" Peter fell on the bed, pretending not to be able to breathe, complaining, "It's too tight, it's killing me, arg." Susan gave him a kiss, and said, "There you are, the kiss of life, you will be okay now." She took off the towel she had wrapped around her, and started to put her underwear on. Peter watched her. Will I ever be able to get my hand behind my back to do that, he asked as she adjusted her bra. Sure, it's just practice. I've been doing it for years, she answered. Come on girl, you can't lie around there, we've got to get ready, it's party time. Peter sat up and picked up his tights. They were a nice barely black pair that really clung to his legs and shone in the light. Be careful with those, they cost a fortune, advised Susan, who seemed to be getting dressed quicker than Peter. She already had her petticoat on and was fastening the buckles on her sandals. Peter stood up to pull his tights up to his waist and stepped into his silver sandals. He bent down and fastened them. He picked up the petticoat and pulled it over his head, letting it drop down. It was a black satin petticoat, but the skirt flared out from the waist and had 4 full-skirted layers, which caused it to flare out. It only came to about 3 inches below his groin. I thought my dress had a built-in petticoat, he said. It does, but it looks so much better with that petticoat as well, said Susan. She had finished dressing herself. Peter was in awe of how she was able to zip herself up at the back. She gently lifted the dress up and told him to put his arms up and lean forward. He did as he was told, and she put the dress over his head and dropped it into place. He dropped his arm down, but she told him to raise his right one again. He lifted his arm, and she made sure his dress was in the correct place, and then did up the zip at the side. Peter looked at himself in the mirror. He couldn't see everything, but he could see his dress. His shoulders were bare, except for the shoestring straps, and the body part was tightly fitted, which gave him a girly shape, and the skirt was very short and stuck out all around. It was gorgeous. He knew that Peter would never be able to ask this girl out. He would have been scared to death. Susan told him he had forgotten something, and handed him a silver sequin short-sleeved shrug. He put it on, and was transfixed as it glistened in the light. Come on downstairs, make up. He turned and went down the stairs, where his mother made him sit down. Millie and Susan were doing their makeup. His mother did his for him. It's a bit stronger tonight for the club, she said. She gave his hair a brush, then sprayed it, and sprayed the bare skin that showed between the top of his dress and the shrug. Thinking about it, she pulled his shrug back and halfway down his arms, so that she could spray all his bare skin, then pulled the shrug back up. She spritzed him with some perfume, and then she fastened his new locket around his neck, and gave him her own silver bangle to put on one wrist, and her silver watch for the other. Then she handed him his silver handbag, which matched the shoes. He pulled the strap over his head, so that he couldn't forget it. He hadn't got used to having one yet. His mom took his hand, he could see tears forming in her eyes, and stood him in front of the full mirror in the hall. Wow, he said. He was amazed by how he looked. The spray made his hair and skin glint in the light. The girls came into the hallway. Well, I feel positively drab, said Susan. Me too, said Millie. Susan was wearing a short sleeveless tight-skirted black dress with gold accessories. Millie had a deep blue short-sleeved dress with a skirt that ended just above her knees and also had gold accessories. Well, I think you both look wonderful, said Peter. I think I am able to say that you all look positively beautiful, said Shirley. It's just as well it's girls only, or you'd be fighting them off. Peter blushed at the thought that a man might fancy him. They all put their coats on. Susan told Peter that she thought she might have another one spare. Millie said she had one that Petra could have as well. Peter had remembered to put his handbag over his coat. A horn sounded outside. The minibus had arrived to take them to the night out. See you later, said Millie, giving Shirley a kiss. You won't, and try to be quiet when you come home, please, she said. Of course we will. Try, that is, said Susan, giving her a kiss. Thanks, Mom, said Peter, and gave his mom a kiss. What for? She asked. Everything, he answered, and happily went out to get on the bus. He climbed onto the bus and took the last place next to Betty. She looked at him and told him she had better behave, otherwise they might just have to tell everyone at work what a naughty girl she is. Peter just smiled. He intended to enjoy himself. The bus pulled up, and they got out. Betty spoke to the driver to make sure he knew when to pick them up. They walked to the club. There was a small queue when they got there, which they joined. There was a lot of chatter going on, but Peter wasn't joining in. He was too busy watching what was going on and how the women were reacting. The queue moved forwards and they went into the club. Betty handed the doorman the tickets, and he directed them to the place to leave their coats. They all took their coats off, with lots of comments on how good everyone looked. Peter took his arm out of the strap to his handbag and let it dangle in front of him, while he undid his coat and took it off. "There's always one who makes us look like poor relations, isn't there?" said Betty as he revealed himself. Peter blushed, and told her it was Susan's dress, not his. "I don't just mean the dress, girl, I mean the whole thing. You look out of this world," everyone agreed. They went into the main part of the club, and were directed to the table they had booked. Directly in front of the stage, Millie and Susan sat either side of him. A waiter took their orders for drinks, and left them menus for food. "How are we going to pay?" asked Betty. "I'll throw in 30 quid, and we can share anything that's left afterwards," said Millie. "Do you want to hold the money, Betty?" "Sure," she said. "I don't suppose there's much chance of you lot being sober at the end." Peter opened his handbag to get his money out. Nevertheless, Millie told him to put it away. She would pay his share. He objected, but she was having none of it. The show began with a group singing their versions of pop songs, but when it became obvious that everyone was settled and had all their drinks, a comic came on and really got them warmed up. Peter hadn't heard any real blue jokes before, and it showed. The show moved on, and two men did some very strange things with their penis, to howls of laughter from the audience. There was a break, when everyone had something to eat. Peter had some chicken and salad. "Not hungry?" asked Susan, who was tucking into a huge burger. "I can't eat wearing this. I think it's cutting the size of my stomach down," he said, pointing to his stomach. "Here, I've half of my bun. You need something to soak up the alcohol," she said. He nibbled on it. The lights went down, and the next part of the entertainment began. The comic came out. By this time the audience were laughing at anything remotely smutty. He then introduced the next act, which was a group of male strippers. They performed a few dances, but hadn't actually stripped. Then they went into a different mode, and one of them stripped off to massive cheers from the audience. He lay on his back, and one of the other dancers got out a can of squirty cream and covered his penis with the cream, carefully placing a cherry on the top. He knew which woman he was going to get up on the stage. The comic had tipped him off. "I need a volunteer," said the can-wielding dancer. There were squeals of "me" from all over the place, but he made a beeline for Peter. "Thank you, young lady," he said. "Come with me." "I didn't say anything," said Peter. "Go on." People around him were shouting, and before he knew what was happening he was on the stage. Peter found himself being led to the microphone, where he was asked his name, and why he was at the club. He told them he was with a hen party for Millie, who he pointed out, so she was dragged up as well. She had to say when she was getting married, and was given a little parcel as a wedding present, for her wedding night. She took it and scurried off the stage. Peter was taken over to the man with his penis covered in cream. He was asked to remove the cherry. He blushed and tried to turn to leave, but wasn't allowed to, and he was told again to remove it. He tentatively went to pick it up, and the man flicked it off, and announced that Petra had just lost her cherry, which brought down the house with laughter. The man covered in cream stood up and pulled on a pair of silver pants. Peter felt the other man's hand behind his neck, and was startled to see his locket in the man's hand. The man went over and Peter saw him drop it down the other man's pants. "Do you want your locket back? Come and get it." Peter stood still, but the audience was egging him on to get it back. He was gently led over, and his hand was placed on the outside of the man's pants. "Can you feel it?" he was asked. "No," answered Peter, "I think it's too small." The audience were in hysterics at that. The man said, "Well, have a feel inside and see if you can find it." Peter was very hesitant, but the alcohol he had drunk was beginning to take effect, and the shouts telling him do it. He pulled the man's pants forward, and stuck his hand down the front. For the first time in his life, his hand was on a willy other than his own, and although it was flaccid, it still felt very large. He found a locket, but it wasn't his. "Have you found anything yet?" he was asked. "Yes," replied Peter, "but it isn't big enough to be mine." The audience collapsed in laughter again. "Well, actually I still have it here," said the man, holding it in front of him. Peter started to withdraw his hand from the man's pants. The man had developed an erection, and he caught Peter's hand through his pants so that Peter rubbed it all the way up from its base to the top. Peter went to take his locket, but he was told he would have to clean his hand first. He was made to lick the cream off. Peter licked the cream off his hand, trying not to think about where it had been, and the man with his locket put it back around his neck, and then gave him a present that looked similar to the one that Millie had been given. Peter went to walk off the stage, but the man with the cream had pulled his pants down, and suggested that he should have it cleaned up as well. Peter scurried off the stage. He had been embarrassed more than enough, and he received a resounding cheer from the girls at his table. The men were winding up their act, and asked for a round of applause for Petra, a very fun-loving girl. The lights came up, and the audience started to settle and renew their glasses. The MC came onto the stage asking for another round of applause for the acts, which elicited calls for more, but the lights went down, and dance music started to play. A few women took to the floor. "Open your presents then, Millie," and Peter were cajoled by the others. Millie opened her first, and with a little scream, produced a big black dildo that looked like a penis. It even had veins running down it. She turned the bottom, and it started to vibrate. She handed it round, and there were comments of her being able to enjoy her honeymoon if Mike didn't come up to scratch. Peter realized that his was probably going to be the same thing. Sure enough, he produced another dildo, and it was even bigger than the one Millie had. "That'll bring tears to your eyes," laughed Susan. Peter was embarrassed. He had nowhere to put it. His handbag wasn't large enough to take it, so he wrapped it up and placed it on the table in front of him. They had another drink, and then had a call that their bus had arrived to take them home. They all stood up. Susan reminded Peter to pick his present up. "I don't want it," he said. "You have to take it. Every other girl here would," answered Susan. He picked it up, and went with the others to get their coats. There was a slow-moving queue, and the other girls wanted to look at his dildo. He handed it over, happy to be rid of it, but when he got it back, after he had his coat back, the wrapping was missing. He put it in his coat pocket, but the head still stuck out. He absent-mindedly stroked it occasionally on the trip home, and thought about the man's huge willy that he had felt on stage. Neither felt unpleasant, he thought, but was concerned that they were so big. He couldn't imagine that they were average-sized. Peter, Millie, and Susan were the first to be dropped off, amid loads of goodbyes, and questions as to whether the dildos were going to be put to use. Peter blushed again, but so did Millie, and they gave each other a grin. They walked up the path, and went into the house. They sat down together on the settee, and kicked off their shoes. "Well, how was it?" asked Shirley. "Great," said Millie. "It was a scream, and I think I had too much to drink." "Me too," said Peter. "Ha, she was star of the show," said Susan, and recounted Peter's part in the entertainment. "You poor thing, they must have picked you out as being easy to embarrass," said Shirley. "Well, they were right," answered Peter. "Well, I'm off to bed now you're home," said Shirley. Susan said they should have another drink before they went to bed, but they all decided on Diet Cola, after all the alcohol they had drunk. They chatted a bit about the night, trying not to laugh too loud, especially when Peter was describing how embarrassed he felt when he had his hand placed on the man's thing. It had grown while he was feeling for his locket in the man's pants. The girls giggled throughout the description. They were all tired and went upstairs, sat on the double bed. No one felt like getting undressed, and they collapsed together and spent the night in the same bed. Shirley knocked on the door, with 2 cups of coffee, and entered to see the 3 of them cuddled together and fully dressed. She gave out a huge sigh, and mumbled something about never having enough cups for that room. "I don't suppose it's worth asking about your night then. Can any of you remember it?" asked Shirley. Peter raised his head, but it felt like a lead weight, and he dropped it back down again with a groan. The other 2 weren't much better, but Shirley told them to sit up, and she would fetch another cup of coffee. When she returned, they were all sat propped up by the headboard. She handed them all a drink. They all thanked her, and she left shaking her head. She knew that nothing had gone on, but she had a son who couldn't get a girlfriend who was now sharing his bed with 2 women, although he did have to pretend to be a girl to do it. She went downstairs, and started to prepare something for lunch. She didn't think they would feel like much before then. One by one they got up, went to the toilet, and washed up. Millie got dressed, and went downstairs first, followed by Susan. Peter just put his nightie and dressing gown on. He wasn't planning on going out again that day. They were chatting, and it turned out that Millie needed to go to church for the final reading of the banns, so they all decided to go. "If I say no, will that mean you can't get married, Millie?" asked Peter. "Yes, in theory, but you would have to have a good reason to object. So I suppose not wanting to lose a friend won't do then." Millie smiled at him and gave him a kiss. "No," she said, "and you won't lose a friend anyway." "Yes, but you won't be going out without him, or staying here, will you?" he said sadly. "Silly girl, I will still try to go out without him for girly nights out when I can." Peter went upstairs and got changed. He decided to wear a skirt and blouse for church. The afternoon passed, and they all went to Millie's church for evensong. Millie looked at Peter and put her finger to her lips when her name was read out. Peter took his chance to pray that he would be a real girl, but thought that God was probably a bit too busy to do that for him. Monday morning came, and the three of them went into work. The chat at the break times was all about the night out, especially Petra's part in it. Peter was embarrassed, but he thought that was because of what he had done, not because he was a boy. Miss Jones asked him to go over to the buyer's office. He was due to move there in 2 weeks' time, and she thought he should introduce himself. "Who has asked Peter?" "You know, I had completely forgotten about that. Perhaps you should wait until next week." Peter was disturbed by the thought of leaving the office. He liked the staff there, especially Millie and Susan. The end of the day came, and Susan drove them over to Millie's church for the dress rehearsal. Peter stood in and watched carefully as to what he would have to do, although he knew it would be Alex and not him at the wedding. They came out. "Oh well, final fitting tomorrow," said Millie. "Then it's just fingers crossed until Saturday." They dropped Peter off at home before driving off home themselves. Peter went into the house. It felt empty without the girls. "It's quiet, isn't it?" his mother said, rather than asked. "You know, it was really very nice having 3 girls in the house. Hectic, but nice." Peter told her that it would be quiet tomorrow as well, because they were going for the final fitting. "Well, I'm sure we can enjoy ourselves together then," said Shirley. Peter decided he needed a bath, and relaxed in a bubble bath, until his mother shouted to tell him to come and get his dinner. He got out and patted himself dry, and then he pulled on his nightie and dressing gown, and came downstairs. His mother smiled at him, and asked how he felt about having to go to another department. He said he didn't want to go. He liked the people he was working with, even though they dressed you up as a girl, she asked. He thought about it, and was going to say especially as they had dressed him up as a girl, but thought that his mother wouldn't like that, so he said yes, even though they prefer me as a girl, they have given me a nice time. They watched tele together, before going to bed. Work seemed to go quickly. Millie and Susan were going to go straight to the final fitting. Peter looked sad. He had got used to being with the girls, and felt left out. Millie noticed and said, "You can come if you like, Petra." Peter's face brightened, and he said he would love to. They arrived at the shop. The window display had a lovely wedding dress with 2 bridesmaids' dresses on 2 mannequins behind it. "They are nice," said Peter. They entered the shop. The young girls were there, and the 2 youngest were already changed. They were wearing pink dresses with a flowery pattern that came down to just below their knees. They had circular hooped petticoats sticking out like little crinoline dresses, and a 3-inch band of lace hung down below the hem of the dresses. "They look lovely," said Millie. Everyone agreed, except the brother of one of the older girls, who was there under duress, and said he thought they looked stupid. Peter could see how upset the girls were at the comment. He told them that he was just jealous because he couldn't wear a lovely dress as they could. Then he asked the shop assistant if they had one in the boys' size because he was so jealous of the girls. "I'm not wearing a dress," he said. "You will be if you don't shut up, you grotty snot-nosed little shit," Peter said quietly in his ear. He seemed to have a lot more self-confidence as a girl. Peter was jealous himself. He had never had the chance to be a bridesmaid, and he thought it was unfair that these young girls had the chance. The 3 older girls tried on their dresses, as well. They had got changed when Susan was called to go for her fitting. Millie saw that Peter looked downcast. She put her arm around him and asked what the problem was. I'm jealous, he said. They all looked nice. The only times that I have been to a wedding I haven't had the chance to go through all of this. Yes, it's very much a girl thing, I suppose. Even the groom doesn't get a look in, said Millie. Millie's mobile phone rang. I'll just have to pop outside, she said. Susan appeared to give them a twirl. The younger girls were leaving. Because one of the mothers had turned up to take them home, they went out. Susan was wearing a full-length royal blue dress with little puff sleeves and long white satin opera gloves that went so far up her arms that they almost met the little sleeves, which she thought was a good idea considering the time of year, and Peter was even more jealous. You're next, the woman said to Peter. I'm only the stand-in, said Peter. Never mind, you can try the dress on anyway, said the woman. Peter did as he was told, and followed the woman through to the fitting room. He undressed, and was helped into the dress and the long gloves, then walked out to the front to join Susan at the front. Millie came back into the shop, and sat down. She looked upset. That was Malcolm. Who's Malcolm? Peter whispered to Susan. Alex's boyfriend, answered Susan. She's had an accident skiing, and she won't be able to come home just yet. She won't be here for Saturday. She looked at Petra. Well, you are the first reserve, and that dress looks like it doesn't need much done to it. Would you like to be a bridesmaid? She asked. Does the Pope pray? Of course I will, answered Peter, adding, what has she done, that she can't come home? She's broken her leg falling off her skis. Poor thing, everyone said. The dressmaker pinned a few alterations to Peter's dress, and he had to take it off. Millie was wearing her wedding dress. Susan and Peter approved of her choice. She changed, and they headed for home. Peter couldn't wait to tell his mother that he was going to be a bridesmaid. He was really excited at the thought of it. His mother was a little worried at the thought of this, but didn't want to upset Peter, so she told him she was thrilled by it. Secretly, she was worried about how he seemed to be thinking of himself as a girl rather than as a boy, although she could see why. He hadn't had anything bad happen to him while he was dressed up as a girl, and seemed to have made some good friends. Susan had gone home, and Peter found his life felt empty without the girls there. He saw that his mother was doing some tidying up, and decided to help her. Shirley was grateful. It made the job easier having 2 people instead of 1, but she knew that Peter wouldn't have done it. But at present, he was behaving more and more like a girl. Job done, they went downstairs, and started to watch the tele. There was a period romance film, which Shirley wanted to watch. Peter would usually have said it was yuck, and didn't want to watch it. This time he just sat with his mother on the settee and watched it. He even took her hand and placed it on his lap. It felt strange to Shirley, sitting with her son, with her hand on his lap feeling his skirt. Peter also cried during the film. He didn't see any reason in trying not to. The doorbell rang. It was Susan. She looked scared. Come in, said Shirley. She had taken to opening the door since Peter started to pretend he was a girl. Peter was worried when he saw Susan. What's the matter? He asked. Shirley got Susan to sit down, where Susan burst into tears. Peter went to make a pot of tea, but came back from the kitchen. He was concerned about his friend. Susan was still crying. I've put the kettle on, he told his mother. Good girl, she said. Susan was still sobbing when he made the tea, and took a cup for her to drink. Susan took a sip, and said thank you. What is the matter? Asked Shirley. I'm sorry, but you were the closest place that I knew someone, Susan answered. Well, you know that you are always welcome here, but please tell me what the matter is, said Shirley. It's my landlord. He told me he was going to put my rent up, but then added there was another way that I could pay, and then he put his hand on my breast, and started to push me towards the bed. I kneed him in the nuts, ran to my car, and then I came here. You poor thing, don't worry, you can stop with us, and we will deal with him in the morning, unless you want to call the police now. Susan nodded her head. Shirley got up and went to phone the police. Peter sat next to Susan, and put his arm around her shoulders. She put her head on his shoulder, and started to cry again. The police came round and took a statement, a PC, and a WPC. They said they probably wouldn't be able to make a case that would stick if he denied it, but they would go round to put the fear of God up him. Shirley mentioned the problem of getting Susan's clothes and stuff, and the police said that they would go with her so that she was all right. They decided to go there, and then the policeman let them into the back seat and asked his controller if someone else was available over his radio. They drove to the house in silence. Peter was concerned, and Susan was shaking as they approached the flat. The policeman knocked on the door. The man seemed to be arguing with him, but the policeman managed to get inside the door. No one outside saw him as he picked the landlord up by the throat and told him the facts of life. The policeman beckoned them to come to the door. "It's all right, he has agreed to stay out of the way." A van pulled up outside the door. "I thought you might need some help," he said. "The guy in the van is a criminal, but he owes me a favor, so don't worry, he is good at this sort of thing." Shirley looked at the single room that Susan lived in. "I wish I had seen this sooner," said Shirley. "I'd have offered you the spare room there, and then." They quickly packed Susan's clothes into cases and bags. The van driver turned out to be very pleasant and helpful. Susan's belongings were all packed away very quickly. The policeman said it would be better if he drove Susan's car than her because she was still upset. "Oh yes," he said, "this is a refund on your rent, your deposit, and he has waived the month's notice." Susan thanked him. The policewoman had put the landlord in the back seat of the police car. The policeman followed them home and dropped them off, parking Susan's car outside the house. The van was quickly emptied, and the contents piled into the hallway. "That's so good of you," said Susan. She had regained her composure and was pleased to be away from the flat. The policeman said that it was no problem. They had been after the landlord for a time, but had nothing on him to be able to arrest him. He radioed for a car to pick him up. The van driver helped unpack the van and left. "We'll leave the unpacking until tomorrow," said Shirley. "I'm sure you won't feel like it now." Susan thanked her profusely for being so understanding. "I'd have liked to clatter him, the dirty little shit, but the police were there, so I thought better of it," said Shirley. Peter sat by Susan and took her hand. "You know all men are bastards," said Susan. "Does that include me?" asked Peter. "No," she answered. "To be honest, I don't tend to think that you were a boy, because you are such a nice girl." Peter didn't bother to correct her about the "were" part. Shirley decided that alcohol was the best route and gave Susan a glass of sherry. She eventually settled and felt tired from the emotional turmoil she had gone through. "I think I'll go to bed," she said. Peter asked her if she wanted company. "Yes, Petra, I do," she answered. So they went up to bed together. Shirley was past bothering about her son going to bed with women. She didn't expect anything to happen. They both slipped into nylon nighties and got into bed. Susan started to cry again. Peter was comfortable with giving her a cuddle, and the feel of the bare legs together, and their nighties against each other was very nice. He talked gently to her, and she stopped crying and fell asleep. Peter couldn't but help thinking what a bastard the man was, and wondered how many others were like that. He eventually fell asleep cuddled up closely to Susan. The next morning, Shirley came in with 2 cups of tea. "Hooray, got it right," she said, and asked Susan if she was going into work. "Yes, thank you, Shirley, I feel better now." "Up and breakfast then," she said, and left them to it. Susan gave Peter a kiss and said, "Thank you as well, Petra, you're both so kind." They got up and got ready to go to work. They went down for breakfast. Susan asked Shirley how much she wanted to be paid for rent, but Shirley told her to leave it until she was sure she wanted to stay. "No problem, Mom," she answered. "I'm sure I want to stay." "Good," said Peter. "Ha, less of the mom. One pain in the neck is bad enough. I don't want two." "Who's the pain in the neck?" asked Peter indignantly. "That son of mine. I think you might know him," she answered. The week passed by, and Friday came. The household had been happy and boisterous since Susan moved in. Shirley had got used to her 2 girls, as she called them, sharing the room and bed. Even Susan calling her mom had become the norm. "It's better than mother, I suppose," she said, after Susan had called her that once. They hadn't seen much of Millie, except at work, but they were having a last night of freedom drink with her and Mike. They got into the taxi to take them to the pub, all in the back seat. Peter was sat in the middle, and felt wonderful as the women either side of him squeezed him, and his nylon-covered legs felt theirs. He couldn't imagine how he had been so lucky for this to happen. They got to the pub, and went in. Millie and Mick were already there, and Peter decided to try something other than Alco Pops, and had half a pint of lager and lime. He found that he liked that better, as he sipped on it. He had positioned himself on a bench seat between Mick and Susan. Mick was pleasant and far better company than he had been when Trevor was there. Unfortunately, it didn't last. Trevor arrived, and started to try to chat Peter up. Peter saw a man come in through the door. He was alone. It was the man who had snobbed him the other night. He asked if he could be let out. Mick stood so that he could get past. The man was at the bar. Peter walked up to him and said hello. The man said hello back, and added how nice it was to have bumped into her again. "Look, Steve," said Peter. "You remembered my name," he said. "How could I forget?" answered Peter. "I have a problem with that man sitting at our table." She clarified which one it was, and then said, "Are you alone tonight?" He answered that he was. "I wonder if you could pretend to be my rugby-playing boyfriend." "I could be your rugby-playing boyfriend full-time if you like," he answered. Peter smiled at him, and said it's all right tonight, will do. He gave Steve a kiss, to which Steve said his legs had turned to jelly. They walked over to the table, and Peter happily announced that this was his boyfriend Steve. He introduced Mick and Trevor, and sat down next to him as everyone shuffled round. The chat continued until the women went to the toilet, and they asked as they got inside. "I asked him if he would pretend to be my boyfriend, because Trevor was such a pain. He was on his own, so he said yes." "Is that all?" asked Susan. "Well, he did ask if he could be a full-time boyfriend," said Peter, "and no, I haven't forgotten that I can't have a boyfriend, Mother." They returned to their seats. "I thought you said he was a second row," said Mike. "He's a center." Peter knew all about rugby, but asked what's the difference. Steve laughed, and said that he had tried to get Petra to watch a game, but she preferred shopping instead. Mick went to the bar, and Trevor to the toilet. "Thanks, Steve, you're great, that's a big help," said Peter, and he found that he really liked him. "I suppose that means Trevor will start on me now," said Susan. "Sorry," said Steve, "but I'm a one-woman man, can't help." Trevor went surprisingly quiet, and the chat covered a lot of things. Apparently, Mick used to play rugby, and Steve was trying to persuade him to start again. His club was a bit weak in depth. Trevor evidently didn't know anything about it, and the girls were discussing the wedding the next day. Peter's ears pricked up when he heard Mick ask Steve if he wanted to come to the late do for the wedding. He apologized for not inviting him before, but he didn't know about him. Steve looked at Peter for the answer. Peter said nothing, but Steve noticed that his pupils had widened, and a small smile at the edges of his lips also showed through. "Yes," he said, "I would like to." Mick filled him in on the details, including how Petra had stood in at the last minute. "But you knew that, didn't you?" he added, and he said he would be there. Steve looked at the clock, and said he would have to go. "Can't have too much to drink, and late nights before the match," he said. Susan nudged Peter, and whispered to him to go to the door with him. It's what a girl would do. Steve looked at Peter. Peter got up, and walked holding hands with Steve. They got to the door, and had a big kiss goodnight. Pratt said, "Peter, why did you agree to come?" "Well, I thought I might get another night out with you, and it's always polite to accept, even though you might not get there." "I presume you don't want me to come." He gave Peter another kiss. "Well, I suppose you can come," said Peter, "but this is going nowhere. You understand that you're not my real boyfriend, don't you?" "We'll see," he answered, and gave Peter another kiss goodnight. Peter felt sorry and confused, and a little empty inside as he watched him walk away, and with a big sigh went back to the table with the others. They all decided that they needed to go home to be ready for the next day, so Millie and Mick left. Trevor had given up on the girls, and also went. Susan phoned for a taxi, and then ganged up with Shirley for the gory details. "Oh God, he's got himself a boyfriend now," said Shirley. "He does seem to be nice though," said Susan, "and from me that is high praise indeed." Don't forget that Petra has a boy hidden away somewhere, said Shirley. Oh yes, I'd forgotten, said Susan. Peter was just sitting quietly, with a warm feeling inside. Someone actually liked him, and was a great kisser as well. The taxi came and they went home. Peter changed into his nightie, and went to bed. Susan joined him, and they had a quiet chat, about how Peter was feeling. Susan had no doubt, Peter was in love. Saturday morning came. Shirley had a good breakfast, but Peter and Susan were too nervous to eat. They got dressed in some comfortable clothes. Susan was wearing trousers. Aren't you going to wear your trousers, Petra? Asked Shirley. I've left them on your bed for you. Yuck, no, answered Peter, my skirt is better. They left the house to go to the hairdresser's. Peter was looking in the mirror. His hair had been done, and like Susan's, had flowers woven into it. The smaller girls had little flower crowns. His makeup was flawless. His nails were varnished in a light pink color. He went to sit with the girls. They were going to have a mini bus back to Millie's parents' house to get changed. Susan joined him, followed by Millie. You look great, said Peter, as she appeared from round the corner. As if I don't always look terrific, answered Millie, with a smile. She was nervous as well. They all went out to get on the minibus. It didn't take long before they reached the house, and started to get ready. Peter was helping the girl whose brother had made the horrible comments at the dress fitting. Did you mean what you said at the dress shop? She asked him, about getting our Paul into a dress. Definitely, if he had carried on and if they had one that would fit him I would have done. I think mine would fit him, she giggled. I think it would suit him as well. Peter smiled. He thought he knew just how the boy would have felt. Once the youngsters were dressed, Susan and Peter went to put their dresses on. They each sipped the other in. Are you okay, Susan asked Peter, as she pulled his white opera gloves up his arms. He nodded yes, just a little bit of butterflies. Me too, answered Susan. I've done this 6 times now, and I still get nervous. They went downstairs. Millie's mother was waiting to say goodbye to Millie. Before setting off to the church, her dad was pacing nervously around the front room. He saw the 2 older bridesmaids, and offered them a drink. They both had a sherry. Millie came downstairs, and had a quiet chat with her mother. Her mother wiped away her tears. Millie was saying, "Don't Mom, you'll make me cry, and ruin my makeup." Her mom left, and went in a car to the church. Give me one of those, said Millie, coming over. Her dad gave her a glass of sherry. It's wrong that, said Peter. What? Asked Millie. Your mom having to go on her own, answered Peter. They had a second sherry to calm the nerves, and the cars arrived. Millie and her dad said see you there to the bridesmaids. They all picked up their bouquets on the way out. Peter went into the first car with the 3 younger girls, and Susan got into the second with the older ones. The 3 young girls were all excited. Apparently, it was their first time as well. Peter told them about how he had threatened the boy at the fitting with having to wear a dress, which tickled them no end. They arrived at the church, and got out of the cars, and walked up to the door. Susan and Peter had to hold the hems of their skirts up, to stop them dragging on the floor, and they waited shivering in the cold, for Millie and her father to arrive. Millie arrived. At the doorway, Peter and Susan fussed around her skirts to get them sorted, then they walked down the aisle. Shirley had a tear in her eyes as she watched her son follow the bride, wearing his dress carrying a bunch of flowers. The service seemed to go quickly. Peter wound up holding Millie's and Susan's bouquets, as well as his own, while the happy couple Susan and Trevor went to sign the register. They walked back down the aisle. How was it then? Shirley asked him, whilst the photographer was taking pictures of the bride and groom on their own, and together with their parents. Terrific, answered Peter. It's been a wonderful day so far. Photographs over, they went to the hotel where the reception and the later do were to be held. Peter was sat at the top table next to Trevor. Susan told him there was no way that she was going to swap, and anyway Peter had a good reason to reject any advances he might make. Peter spent the time eating and talking to Mick's father on his other side, and Millie's mother across him. Trevor, it turned out, was nervous anyway. He wasn't used to speech making and was uptight about it. Eventually he got through the toasts, and the cake had been cut. Everyone relaxed. Mick and Millie were doing the rounds of relations and friends. Susan and Peter grouped together with the older two of the young bridesmaids and got them to have a drink. The young girls soon got tipsy and giggled about the way that Petra had upset Paul. Paul was sat down on his own. The four of them decided to go and sit with him and formed a little circle so that he was caught and couldn't escape. His sister started asking Peter if her brother had behaved well enough. "Marginal," answered Peter. Paul looked positively worried. "Perhaps we could just make him wear your dress when you get home, or we could take him upstairs when Millie gets changed." "Yes, we are getting changed as well," the young girls said, "so there will be a dress for him." "We aren't," said Susan. "These dresses are too nice not to make the most of them." "Yes," answered one of the girls, "but yours aren't quite as impractical as these hooped petticoats. Our skirts keep going up when we sit down." The main reception ended, and the younger bridesmaids went home. The other two had changed out of their dresses. They were both wearing short black dresses. They sat in the reception area of the hotel, together with Susan and Peter, who had commented on how good they both looked. Paul had been helping himself to the sherry, and was on the verge of getting drunk. Chatting about the day's events, they heard a gagging sound. Paul had thrown up, just as his parents came through the door. "He's determined to spoil our day, isn't he?" his dad said. "I suppose we will have to take him home." "Sorry, Chrissy, but you'll have to come as well," he said to his daughter. "We can't leave him in these clothes for too long. Mind you, it will stink the car out. He doesn't have pen and—" "You can get him changed here," said Chrissy, "and then you don't need to go home, or have your car smelling for days." "How?" asked her mother. "Where are you going to get the clothes?" "Well," said Chrissy, "I told you about how he was threatened with wearing a dress himself if he didn't behave. We think that he could wear mine, and it won't smell nasty." Paul was complaining about the smell. He was obviously drunk. Chrissy said and lied that she thought he had been trying on her clothes at home anyway. "All right, I suppose it would be for the best, as there is nothing else," said his mother. His dad wasn't convinced, but agreed. He didn't want his car smelling for days afterwards. Paul was taken up to the changing room by his mother, Peter, Susan, and Chrissy. He wasn't sure what was happening, but was very quickly stripped, cleaned up and dressed in the white tights, the petticoat, the dress, the white shoes, and had the flower crown on his head. They took him back downstairs where he had a lot of people taking his photo. He wouldn't be able to forget this day in a hurry. He was sat in a corner, with a glass of cola, to help sober him up. Steve appeared at the doorway looking around for someone he recognized, then came up to Susan and Peter to say hello. Shirley arrived at much the same time and joined them. "Who is that little girl sat in the corner?" she asked. "Oh, that's that little pain in the arse, Paul. He is going to be so embarrassed with all the photos we have of him when he sobers up," said Susan, and explained what they had done to him and why. Steve said that they were mean, but he was laughing as he said it. Peter thought that he should tell Steve the truth, and this seemed to be a good time. He told him that Paul wasn't the only boy dressed as a girl. At first Steve said he didn't believe that a boy could make such a beautiful girl. "Well, I never made much of a great boy," said Peter. Steve didn't get annoyed, he just asked for the full story. They went over to a quiet corner and Peter told him the full story of what had happened. Steve surprised him and said that he was amazed that anybody would do that. Peter just said that he liked Millie, it was for her, but Steve didn't believe him. He thought that Peter had found out something about himself. Steve went and got them a drink each. Susan had come to sit with them. "So," he said, "what is the plan now?" Peter looked sad, and said his mother had told him he had to change back the next day, but he was planning to tell her that he shouldn't do that until Millie came home, and anyway he wanted to talk about the wedding at work on Monday. Steve thought for a bit, and then he asked what excuse Peter had planned after that. "What for?" asked Peter. Susan interjected, "I think he doesn't believe that you want to change back. At a guess, I think that he thinks you would rather be a girl than a boy, and you will do anything you can to stay as a girl, and what is more, I think he is right." Peter sipped his drink, but didn't answer. Susan took one of his hands, and Steve the other. "I'll help you all the way, if that is what you want," said Susan. "I don't know how to say this," said Steve. "I am disappointed that you are not a girl, but then I've only seen you as a girl." Look, if you want to be a boy I'll leave, broken-hearted, but I'll go. But if you would rather be a girl, I'll stay. I think I can help as well. Susan told him he was a very lovely man. Steve smiled at her. He said, just my luck, I find the girl of my dreams, and she has a Willie, there ain't no justices there. Paul had woken up, and didn't know what was happening. He felt very peculiar, and hadn't a clue what he was wearing. On the other hand, maybe there's, he added when he saw Paul. They all burst out laughing. Steve and Peter spent most of the night dancing. Susan spent it trying to evade Trevor and talking to Shirley, and Paul spent it crying because he had realized what he was wearing and felt stupid. Eventually the night finished. Millie and Mick had gone off for their honeymoon, and Steve had given Peter a kiss goodbye, leaving his phone number, but Peter wanted him to come round to his house the next day. He said he wanted to have a bit of time to think, and wanted to talk to Steve when he was a bit more sober. Steve agreed to come. The three of them had a taxi home. Shirley asked Peter what he had been doing leading the poor boy on. You're going to be a boy again tomorrow, she said. Peter told her not to ruin his day. I want to still be a girl on Monday. I can't tell everybody about it if I'm a boy. After all, who ever heard of a boy being a bridesmaid? Okay, you can stay that way for Monday, but I want to be a girl when Millie comes back in 2 weeks, said Peter. The car arrived at the house, and they went in. Susan sat down with Shirley, while Peter went to make a hot drink for them all. I think he has something to tell you, Susan told Shirley. Yes, I think you are right, Shirley replied. What should I say? I can't answer that, Shirley. I know what I think, but I don't think that I should tell you until we know for sure. Peter came back and gave everyone their drink. It was late, they were tired. Shirley couldn't wait any longer. Tell me, Petra, what reason are you going to give me after another 2 weeks? Susan sat up and moved to the edge of her seat. Peter said, reason, what for? To not wear your trousers, said Shirley. Peter stayed silent. He didn't want to hurt his mother. It stayed silent for about 5 minutes. Shirley guessed why. She took his hands and said, look, I'm your mom, and I'll always love you whatever happens in your life. Peter looked at her sadly. He said, but I won't be your son anymore, and I don't want to wear trousers either. The night dragged on, but no one was going to sleep. Shirley went out to make another drink. Peter asked Susan what she would do. She replied that she didn't know. She had never been in that position, and couldn't imagine what it would be like to be a boy. She had never thought about it because she liked being a girl. So do I, said Peter. Shirley returned with the drinks, and sat down. Peter looked at her, and said, Mom, I don't want to be a boy. I like being a girl, and I want to stay a girl. Please don't be angry. I don't want to have to dress up as a boy anymore. Shirley reminded him that he was a boy, and as such didn't have to dress up as one, but Peter only said he felt right wearing a skirt, but didn't like the idea of having to wear trousers. He went upstairs to go to bed. Shirley and Susan could hear him crying in his bedroom. They also went to bed, but slept fitfully. Peter had got up several times in the night. They were all in bed still the next day. When the clock turned to 2 o'clock, there was a knock on the door. Steve had left it late to come round. Shirley invited him in, apologizing for still being in her nightclothes. Susan and Peter also heard him come in, and came downstairs. They all went into the front room, the women and Peter wearing nighties and dressing gowns. I said I would come round, and here I am, he said to Peter. Have you had a think about it? They told him about the late night, and he said he could come back at a better time. Susan said she was parched, and would make them all a drink. She went to the kitchen, but was listening intently to what was being said. Peter found it hard to talk. He still wasn't sure what to say. Eventually his feelings tipped the balance. I would rather spend the rest of my life as a girl, but I don't know how I can, he said sadly. That's where I can help, said Steve. I have done a bit of searching on the internet, and I have found a clinic in Canada that can do the surgery. Peter looked at him amazed. What, changed me down there, said Peter, pointing at his groin. Yes, and up there as well if you want them to, rather than trying to grow them yourself. What they can't do is turn you into a real woman, because you wouldn't be able to have a baby. It was quiet for a while. Susan decided to come in with the drinks, and they all took a sip of tea. Susan said that she had overheard what Steve had said, but wouldn't it be expensive? Yes, said Steve, but I can afford it. So, what would you want out of it? Asked Shirley. Petra to walk down the aisle and say I do, hopefully after I've said it. I will however place the money in a trust, which only Petra can access, so that she is sure of the operation, even if we don't get together afterwards. That's very good of you, but isn't it expensive? Asked Susan. Yes, but I own a software company, and I've just floated it on the stock exchange. The other guys who were with me work for me. I don't normally talk about money, but I do have more than £1,000,000 to spare. He looked at 3 people dressed in nighties and dressing gowns, who all had their mouths open. Peter spilled his tea in his lap and rushed to the kitchen to dry himself. Surely you could find a real woman, said Shirley, who you could have children with. I don't mind adopting, I was adopted myself, he replied, and I have never felt this way before about anyone, and all of my girlfriends have been girls, and no, I have never gone out with a boy, not that I can get my head round Petra really being male. Peter came back, and Steve suggested that he should get dressed. Peter asked why. Steve answered that from what he could gather Petra had never gone out without Susan, Shirley, or Millie, and this was her chance to go out on her own with a man. Perhaps it would help her to decide on which path she wanted to follow. Peter went upstairs. He returned wearing a white blouse, with the tight-fitting pink skirt that Susan had borrowed, but had given him back. He was quite taken with having to take smaller steps because, along with his high heels, it restricted his stride. He had put a pair of 3-inch black court shoes on, and his tights were pale tan. He also draped a round neck cardigan around his shoulders like a cape with only the top button fastened. He had tidied his hair, and put on a little makeup on his eyes, and pale pink lipstick to finish it off. Steve was stunned. He still couldn't accept that Peter was really a boy. Come on then, said Peter. Steve came with him to the door, and led him to the car, a red Ferrari sports coupe. He opened the door for Peter to get in. Peter fell in backwards, as he wasn't able to lift his leg high enough to get in properly because of the tight skirt. As he sat up, giggling, he spun his legs inside. Typical, said Susan to Shirley. No sooner decides to be a girl than he finds a millionaire who wants to marry him. I know a few real girls who would like that to happen. Steve pulled away. Shirley was concerned that her son was going out with a man she hardly knew. Susan asked her if she would have felt the same if Petra was in boy mode as Peter, and going out with a girl. No, I suppose not, answered Shirley. Steve asked Peter if she had eaten that day. No, not yet, I'd only just got up. I'll take us somewhere to eat then, said Steve, and pulled onto the motorway. He stuck his foot down, and Peter felt himself pushed back into the seat. Steve quickly took the car up to 70 miles per hour. Wow, that's some acceleration. Steve looked across, grinned, and said, that's nothing, watch this. He hit the accelerator, and hit 150 miles per hour in no time at all. Before Peter asked him to slow down, he couldn't see straight at that speed. It wasn't long before they left the motorway, and headed off down a country lane, to a hotel. Steve pulled up outside the doorway. This is my hotel, we can get room service, he said. Peter was a little bit worried, and Steve noticed. It's all right, I'm not going to do anything nasty, and I want to have a virgin bride. He walked round the car, and opened Peter's door. Peter was having trouble getting out of the car, so Steve helped him stand up, which meant that they were standing close to each other, and Steve gave Peter a kiss, and told him that he loved him. Peter was still feeling a bit vulnerable without having the support of Susan. Steve took his hand and led him to the hotel entrance, where he gave the doorman the key to his car, and asked him to park it. They then went inside. Peter had never been in such a nice hotel before. Steve retrieved the key card, and they went to the lift to go upstairs. It turned out that Steve had a suite. He picked up the phone and ordered them a meal from the menu. Peter had sat down on the 2-seat settee. Although there was a choice of armchairs, Steve went to sit by him. Have you thought about what you want to do yet? Steve asked Peter. I'm not sure, Peter answered. I told my mom that I want to be a girl, but I'm not sure what it would be like to be turned into one. I'm sure I would be embarrassed going into a hospital and telling them that I wanted to be a girl. It's not normal, is it? He paused, waiting for an answer, but Steve didn't say anything. He waited for Peter to continue. Peter continued, as there was no answer, and it will be painful as well. I'm not sure I could take that. There was a knock on the door, and their meals were delivered. It's only a snack. I didn't think you would be very hungry after all that alcohol last night, said Steve. That and the butterflies, said Peter. They ate their snacks, and Steve made a cup of tea for both of them. They both returned to the settee. So why have you got butterflies then? Asked Steve. I don't know, being here alone with you, wondering about what I should do, and worrying that someone will think I am a boy. I felt safe when I was with the girls from work, Mom, Susan, and Millie, but I'm not sure at the moment, answered Peter. Right then, let's go somewhere that there are more people, but you can be safe, said Steve, standing up. He put his hand for Peter to take, and helped him to his feet. Besides, no one would believe that a boy could walk in those shoes, or wiggle his bum the way you do. They went downstairs, the car was retrieved, and Steve drove them into the town. He parked up, and they walked to the local cinema. What's on? Peter asked. I don't know, let's just take the chance, shall we? Answered Steve. They went in, and Steve led Peter to the double seats in the back row. They sat down, and Steve placed his arm around Peter's shoulders. The film was a weepy, and Peter allowed himself to cry, something he would have struggled against as a boy. He had found himself relating to the female lead, rather than the man. He fiddled in his handbag trying to find a tissue, but Steve offered him his handkerchief, and he wiped his eyes. Has my makeup run? Peter asked. Yes, but I'll clean you up, said Steve, and wiped his face for him. Peter got out his makeup and mirror, and patched up his makeup, as best he could in the dim light. They returned to the car, and Steve drove them back to the hotel, for an evening meal, which they had in the dining room. There are a lot of people who keep looking at me, Peter whispered to Steve. Steve smiled. Of course they are. The men are all jealous of me having a girlfriend like you, and the women are all jealous because you are the most beautiful girl here, he replied. Peter blushed, and lowered his head, but made sure that he kept eye contact with Steve. They stayed quiet, each with their own thoughts, until they had finished eating. I would have thought you would have had a drink, Peter said. Steve answered that he didn't drink and drive, and he had to take him home. Peter said he could always stay there, but Steve was having none of it. Besides, he said, your mother would go spare and kill me if I didn't take you home. You are still younger than you appear. Peter was disappointed, but allowed Steve to escort him back to the car and drive him home. Steve pulled up outside the door and gave Peter a kiss, before getting out and helping Peter to get out of the car. He walked him to the door and kissed him again, before ringing the bell. Shirley came to the door. There you are, all safe and sound, said Steve. Shirley invited him in, but he said he needed to go as he had a long day tomorrow. Susan and Shirley wanted to know what had gone on. Peter was happy to tell them what had gone on, but thought that Steve might be going off him because he had insisted that he had to come home. Shirley told him that showed how much he cared, and that he wouldn't have done that otherwise. Shirley went off to bed. Susan asked Peter how far he would have gone. About the same as we do together. A nice kiss and a cuddle would have been nice. They went off to bed together. The next day Peter told his mother that he was going to accept Steve's offer. Shirley cried when she heard her son tell her that he wanted to be a girl. Deep down she had hoped he might decide against it. It won't always be easy, she said. I know, said Peter, but it's what I want. I feel much better as a girl than I ever did as a boy. Susan told him that she would give her all the support she could, and thought that Millie and the other girls would as well. You know that I will, but I'll tell you anyway. I will support you whatever you do, said Shirley. After much crying and comforting each other, Peter picked up the telephone and told Steve that he had made up his mind and was going to accept his kind offer if it was still there. Of course it is, answered Steve.